In this video, I'll explain the entire Resident Evil timeline in chronological order. Now, as you already know, this franchise has been around for over 3 decades, and in that time, around 30 games have been released. However, I'm only going to focus on the canon ones in this video, which brings the number down to around 10 core games. But before we get into those, there's quite a bit of lore to catch up on. Backstory. Now, as you might expect, Resident Evil's story begins long before the Umbrella Corporation's founding. As a matter of fact, the earliest event in Resident Evil's main timeline happens in the Neolithic Age. Back then, an unnamed member of the Ndipaya tribe from West Africa discovered and consumed a mysterious flower known as the Zanentrepa that he found inside a cave. Now, this flower would eventually be called the Stairway of the Sun, and it's going to play a significant part in the Resident Evil universe once we arrive at the main games. But for now, all you should know is that this dude unsurprisingly got sick from eating the exotic bloom. It's not your typical infection though, because the Zanentrepa ended up giving this unnamed guy abilities that are more or less superhuman. From there, this person was revered as a deity in his community. The man would spearhead technological and infrastructural innovations for his tribe, turning the Ndipaya into an exceedingly advanced society for their time period. However, it was only a matter of time before the crap hit the fan, as the Ndipaya's futuristic home was ultimately destroyed by mutant fauna that found its way to their city. The tribe wasn't completely wiped out, but they did vow to keep their home a secret from the world at large in the aftermath of the chaos. It was during this era that another tribe, in what would eventually become Spain, started worshipping parasitic arthropods known as Plaga. Fast forward a few centuries to the Iron Age. In this era, a mysterious group known as Los Iluminados founded their own subterranean city in present-day Valdelobos, Spain. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, another expansive underground human settlement is established, this time by a quartet of unnamed individuals rumored to each possess their own superpowers. The same culture eventually got lost in the annals of history, but what we do know is that its remnants eventually founded a village not too far away from their abandoned city. Meanwhile, in the New World, another civilization is established somewhere in present-day New England, one spearheaded by an unnamed Native American tribe. Moving the clock forward to the late 15th century, Los Iluminados were nearly wiped out during Spain's Reconquista period. The ensuing rout drove the Plaga parasites deep into their underground settlement prior to it getting sealed off from the rest of the world. The same man who initiated Los Iluminados' destruction, Salazar, also built a castle right above Los Iluminados' underground city, as a measure to stop their cult from ever gaining prominence again. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, a clan known as the Dimitrescu builds their own stronghold on the same ground where the mysterious city from the Iron Age once stood. This castle would play host to skirmishes between its inhabitants and so-called mutants, which in turn would become integral to the region's folklore and culture. Moving on to the early 1600s, a secret society known as the Family establishes its roots in then British-controlled America, setting up shop in New England right on top of the same ancient city that the Native Americans built during the Iron Age. And so we arrive in the 19th century. A woman named Veronica Ashford, who would eventually be known as the first Countess of Ashford, emerged during this period and became the progenitor of, well, the Ashford family. It was in the late 1800s that a woman named Miranda was born. Now, we won't get too much into Miranda at this point, but keep this name in the back of your head because she'll be playing a big part in the Resident Evil saga down the line. In any case, it was also during this era that Travis Enterprises established itself as one of the biggest trade companies on the African continent. Again, this isn't that important right now, but it will be soon. A bit later, in 1909, Miranda gave birth to a daughter named Eva. However, 10 years later, in 1919, the H1N1 flu pandemic ravaged Miranda and Eva's Eastern European village. The sickness spread quickly and soon took Eva's life, causing Miranda's psyche to unravel. See, Miranda felt that she had nothing to live for after Eva's demise, so she decided to travel north of her village to take her own life. Instead of meeting her own tragic end, though, Miranda came into contact with the so-called Black God, an exotic fungal root that ended up mutating Miranda's genes and pretty much giving her superhuman abilities. This manifested in Miranda's ability to cure the people of her village of the H1N1 flu when she returned, which pretty much turned her into a miracle worker and a sort of deity in her own community. Sometime later, in 1953, scientists Stanley Miller and Harold Urey went on to break new barriers in the field of abiogenesis, aka the study of the origins of life on Earth. It was also in the same year that an architect named George Trevor and his wife Jessica gave birth to a daughter named Lisa. Lisa, like Miranda, will have a part to play in Resident Evil's overarching narrative, so keep your eyes peeled for her as well. And so, we find ourselves in the swingin' 60s. It's 1967, and a scientist named James Marcus discovers the progenitor virus while in the middle of his studies into Paleozoic microbial fossils. Now, the progenitor virus, as the name suggests, is one of the earliest bacteria known to man. Well, as far as the Resident Evil universe goes. Oh, and it just so happens that the progenitor virus finds its suitable host in the Stairway of the Sun plant. Anyway, Marcus eventually got fired from his job at the university he was working at in Switzerland at the time. But this didn't deter him from studying the progenitor virus further. In fact, he managed to pull his pal, the wealthy Oswell E. Spencer, into funding his studies, joining up with another scientist named Edward Ashford. Yep, from the Ashford family. Marcus eventually managed to create new life using the progenitor virus. The success of their experiments allowed the three men to establish their own private company called the Umbrella Corporation. As I'm sure you already know, Umbrella is basically a mega corporation that has its hands dipped in a variety of industries, ranging from cosmetics to transportation to food production. However, just like your typical mega corporation, these things are all meant to divert your attention from their real endeavors. That's because the Umbrella Corporation's #1 cash cow comes in the form of their pharmaceutical division. Their favorite product? Super deadly viruses that they sell to various military groups all over the world. And in cases where they quote-unquote accidentally cause lethal epidemics, Umbrella Corp makes sure to keep their hands clean by formulating the cure. Now, Umbrella Corp might be one of the Resident Evil franchise's most recognizable entities, but they're by far not the only shady corporation in this universe. They have rivals too, and one of those is Tricell, another mega corporation that sprang from Travis Enterprises and is just as scummy as Umbrella Corp. More on these other players later, because I'm not going to spoil the fun for you guys just yet. Going back to the timeline, a couple of virologists named Albert Wesker and William Birkin worked at an Umbrella Corporation facility just outside Raccoon City, a place called the Arklay Laboratory, from 1978 to 1995. Let's fast forward about 3 years. It's 1998, and we finally find ourselves in the first chronological installment as far as the mainline Resident Evil games are concerned, a title called Resident Evil 0. July 23rd, 1998. Before we start diving deep into this tale though, there are a few things I need to get you familiar with first. Firstly, there's the STARS team. STARS stands for Special Tactics and Rescue Service. It's an elite special forces unit of law enforcement officers working for Raccoon City's police department. Now, without getting too ahead of ourselves here, all you should know for now is that STARS plays an integral part in the first few chronological installments in the Resident Evil games. More to the point, STARS is made up of both ex-military agents and experts from various academic disciplines. And, well, let's just say that this unit's primary objectives are twofold. One, they're mainly deployed as an anti-terrorist force. And two, STARS was established as a sort of response team for general emergencies within their jurisdiction. Next, one of Resident Evil 0's plot points revolves around the T-virus. Now, the T-virus is basically a mutated version of the progenitor virus that Umbrella Corp created sometime in the mid-20th century, mainly meant as a biological weapon. Finally, Resident Evil 0 has two primary characters. First, there's Rebecca Chambers, who, despite being one of the most underrated protagonists in the series, is also a member of STARS, specifically its Bravo team. She's not even out of her teen years yet, but our girl has a degree in chemistry, which landed her a job as a medic for the elite squad. The second playable character is Second Lieutenant Billy Cohen, a disgraced former Marine who got arrested for a crime he didn't commit. All that mentioned, Resident Evil 0 starts on the fateful day of July 23rd, 1998. It opens with the Ecliptic Express, a private locomotive that the Umbrella Corporation owns. The Ecliptic Express is ambushed by a bunch of freaky leeches at the onset of the story. And while everyone on board the train gets snuffed out by these creatures, a shady dude keeps his eyes glued to the massacre while hanging out on the side of a hill. 2 hours pass, and the Raccoon City Police Department sends out its STARS Bravo team to check out a series of grisly crimes involving cannibalism somewhere in the Arklay Mountains. just on the outskirts of Raccoon City itself. Bravo team takes a helicopter to their mission coordinates, but it crashes due to good old-fashioned engine failure while making their way to the Arklay Mountains. Rebecca, who also happens to be a rookie within the squad, gets separated from the rest of her teammates and ends up coming across the Ecliptic Express, which has since come to a halt after the leech attack. What our heroine witnesses when she enters the vehicle is the stuff of nightmares, as each and every passenger aboard the Ecliptic Express has now transformed into shambling undead monsters. You see, the leeches that attacked the train weren't just ordinary worms you'd find in the swamp. These things actually carried the super potent, super deadly T-virus in them, which explains the Ecliptic Express passenger's zombie transformation. Here's the thing though, Rebecca has no idea about any of this just yet. Along the way, Rebecca comes across Billy. You see, Billy was aboard a police van headed for the facility where he was about to be executed for the crime he didn't commit. However, the van crashed in the area, which is how he ended up near the train. Rebecca and Billy decide to form an alliance, and the duo continues investigating the Ecliptic Express. Not long after, they spot the same mysterious dude who had been watching the leech attack at the opening of our story. Even more mysterious is when the Ecliptic Express engines suddenly restart and the train prepares to ride out again. What our protagonists don't know, however, is that a couple of Umbrella agents named Albert Wesker and William Birkin had given out the order to the Umbrella Corps underlings to assume command of the Ecliptic Express and ultimately sabotage it. The problem is, the two Umbrella agents they sent end up getting attacked by more of the T-virus leeches and ultimately fail their mission. Rebecca and Billy immediately notice that the train has sped up. So our heroes come up clutch and divert its course toward the old Umbrella Corps executive training facility. It's here the duo learns about James Marcus, one of Umbrella Corporation's co-founders, and the same man who used to be the director of this mysterious facility. It's also revealed that James is the same man who first shed light on the progenitor virus. Now, James decided to mess with the progenitor virus to create an entirely new, even deadlier strain for Umbrella Corps. This ended up being the T-virus, and it was created by fusing the progenitor virus with the DNA of leeches. The result? Whoever gets infected by the T-virus turns into a grotesque creature. Meanwhile, we find out that Albert Wesker has decided that he's had enough of Umbrella Corps. Make no mistake though, the man has not turned to the good side. The reality is that Wesker plans to align himself with Umbrella Corps' rival company, which, by the way, is never named in the series, to conduct his own research into the T-virus. Wesker offers his longtime research partner and fellow virologist William Birkin to join him in leaving Umbrella Corps, but Birkin refuses, citing that he's too far along in his research into something called G-virus. Okay, now let's pause for a moment here in order for you guys to learn about the G-virus. Simply put, the G-virus, like the T-virus, is derived from the progenitor virus. However, the G-virus is far deadlier and even more potent than its T counterpart. Originally designed to kickstart human evolution, the G-virus doesn't just create zombies. It creates literal monsters by mutating its host. In fact, the G-virus is so potent that it can even revive the dead, albeit not exactly in a 100% human state. And aside from those, what makes this particular strain such a threat is that the people infected by the G-virus retain their ability to reproduce, which is absolute nightmare fuel. Back to Resident Evil Zero's tale, Rebecca and Billy end up getting separated from each other. Now on their own, Rebecca comes across her commanding officer from STAR's Bravo team, Enrico Marini. Enrico gives our girl the coordinates to an abandoned mansion where they and the rest of Bravo team can reunite. He also allows Rebecca to keep searching for Billy before reconnecting with the rest of Bravo team. Enrico leaves, and soon enough, crap hits the fan when Rebecca is confronted by a tyrant, which is basically described as the pinnacle of T-virus infection. Rebecca manages to fend off the tyrant, and she links up with Billy not long after that. The duo is then forced to confront the same tyrant, and this time our heroes finally put a definitive end to this deadly monstrosity. From there, Billy and Rebecca continue their journey to look for the mysterious man they encountered earlier. Resident Evil Zero's story climaxes when Rebecca and Billy finally learn about the origins of the mysterious man from earlier. Turns out that this dude happens to be a progenitor virus creature known as the Queen Leech. It also happens that the Queen Leech was the final experiment that James Marcus created before his untimely demise. We also get the big reveal behind Marcus' death. It turns out that one of his old friends and Umbrella Corps co-founder Oswell E. Spencer screwed him over and ordered his assassination in order to get his hands on Marcus' invaluable research data. What Spencer didn't account for was the Queen Leech using its abilities to reanimate Marcus' lifeless body. Well, I guess reanimation is a pretty strong word here, because what exactly happened was that the Queen Leech basically assumed Marcus' identity upon entering his corpse. It worked well, too. Perhaps too well, because the Queen Leech started believing that it was actually James Marcus when it gained the old man's memories. From there, Leech Marcus made moves to orchestrate the attack on both the Ecliptic Express and the abandoned training facility as a way to get vengeance against Spencer and his old company. On top of that, Leech Marcus remained true to its viral roots, as it also had designs to spread the T-virus all over the world in one massive outbreak. In any case, the duo gets into a scuffle with Leech Marcus at the abandoned facility and manages to knock it out for a bit. They attempt to escape just as William Birkin activates the building's self-destruct sequence. Oh, and get prepared to see a lot more of these. Resident Evil loves their self-destruct sequences. In any case, the Queen Leech and our protagonist get into one final confrontation soon after. Billy takes advantage when he realizes the creature's weakness to sunlight. Long story short, they take out the Queen Leech and make it out of the facility just in time for Birkin to blow up the whole place. Resident Evil Zero's story closes as Rebecca spots the mansion where she and the rest of Bravo team are supposed to regroup. So she and Billy go their separate ways after Rebecca tells him she'll change her police report, claiming that Billy was killed during Bravo team's recent mission, effectively allowing him to shake off the authorities. Billy leaves and Rebecca heads to the mansion to reunite with the rest of her team. But the night is not over for Rebecca just yet, as this mysterious mansion is anything but an ordinary mountain retreat. Resident Evil 1, July 24th, 1998. And so, we arrive at the game that pretty much established the survival horror genre as we know it. Not to mention giving fans one of the most iconic video game series of all time. Don't get it twisted though. 1996's Resident Evil was by no means the first ever survival horror game. However, the point is, the entire video game industry would look so much different if this atmospheric B-movie style game with annoyingly tanky controls didn't exist. That said, Resident Evil 1 takes place immediately after the story of Zero wraps up. However, players don't get to play as Rebecca Chambers in this one. Instead, we're introduced to a couple of STARS agents who would go on to become cornerstones for the entire RE franchise, Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield. Now, before we begin, what you should know about this particular Resident Evil game is that players are given the option to choose between playing as either Jill or Chris at the beginning of the game. The overall narrative of the title doesn't exactly change depending on which character you choose, but certain minor details are affected. A good example of this comes in the form of Jill and Chris' respective supporting characters. If you choose Jill, she'll mostly interact with another STARS operative named Barry Burton. If you select Chris, then your supporting character would be none other than Rebecca. On top of that, Chris and Jill each have their own unique gameplay mechanics, like how Chris has more health or how Jill has a lockpick that can open locked doors. All that said, Resident Evil 1's story begins just a day after the events of its chronological predecessor. It's July 24th, 1998, and STARS HQ has lost contact with Bravo team after they were sent to the Arklay Mountains. So HQ sends out their Alpha team, which is made up of operatives Chris, Jill, Barry, Brad Vickers, Joseph Frost, and their commanding officer, Captain Albert Wesker. Yep, it's the same Albert Wesker who works for Umbrella as a virologist. But none of his STARS comrades know that. Soon enough, Alpha team manages to locate Bravo team's crashed helicopter, only to discover that its pilot, Kevin Dooley, has already perished in the accident. But the question is, where are the other Bravo team members? So Chris, Jill, and the rest of the squad do some recon in the area only to be ambushed by a pack of zombie dogs. The ensuing encounter leads to Joseph's brutal demise. On the other hand, Brad screws everyone over by boarding Alpha Team's own helicopter and flying out of there. The remaining squad members manage to escape the zombie Dobermans and soon reach the same mansion that Bravo Team's Captain Marini and Rebecca mentioned in Resident Evil 0. Here's where things start to diverge depending on which main character you select. If you choose Jill, Chris gets separated from the rest of Alpha Team and doesn't even make it to the mansion. On the other hand, the opposite goes if you select Chris. Jill is the one who goes missing in action. I'll just assume the main character is Chris for now to make it simpler. In any case, Chris and the remaining Alpha Team members eventually reach the mansion. From there, Chris decides to break away from the squad in order to do some solo investigation in the mansion's west wing after they hear a strange rattling from that direction. What he witnesses next is the stuff of nightmares, as he spots an undead monster feasting on STAR's Bravo team operative Kenneth Sullivan. Things get even more complicated for our hero when Captain Wesker suddenly goes MIA, leaving Chris to his own devices. So he goes on to search for the other STAR's operatives inside this creepy mansion, and along the way, he gradually finds out the ultimate fates of nearly each and every Bravo team member who stepped into this manor. First, there's Forrest Spire, who meets his end after getting ambushed by a murder of mutated crows. Then there's Bravo team member Richard Aiken, a dude who succumbs to the venom of a giant mutant snake known as Yawn. Finally, Captain Enrico Marini himself takes a bullet to the head from a mysterious figure, just as he reveals that there's a spy working within STARS. But like I mentioned earlier, Rebecca survives the whole ordeal when Chris rescues her somewhere along the way. In any case, Chris soon finds out that the mansion is actually just a front for another Umbrella Corporation research facility, which focuses on crafting BOWs, aka bioorganic weapons. On top of that, we finally get the answer to Bravo Team's original mission back in Resident Evil 0. You know, the cannibal murders they were supposed to look into. It turns out that these sordid crimes were perpetrated by people who subsequently turned into zombies after being infected by the T-virus. Chris eventually reaches a secret underground lab deep beneath the mansion. He then learns that the spy Captain Marini mentioned before his untimely demise is none other than Alpha Team's own squad leader, Albert Wesker. Shocker! Oh, and there's also another big reveal here, that Wesker had actually blackmailed Barry to work for him in exchange for his family's safety. Resident 1 reaches its climax when Wesker sends a tyrant to deal with Chris and take out any loose ends in the mansion. Now, here's the point where the player's main character choice and their respective decisions throughout the game affect the outcome of the story. You see, Resident Evil 1 has multiple endings. In a couple of them, either Rebecca or Barry loses their life during the climactic sequence of the game, and in another instance, either Jill or Chris dies. Thankfully, this is a franchise with an established canon, unlike some other survival horror games, Silent Hill. So we actually know who lives and who dies. The official canonical ending to Resident Evil 1 is that both main characters, namely Jill and Chris, along with both Rebecca and Barry, all survive the freaky events at the mansion. And on top of that, the canonical conclusion to this game sees the mansion blowing up after our heroes manage to activate its self-destruct sequence. Resident Evil 2, September 29, 1998. Resident Evil 2 was released in 1998 and has since gone on to be just as iconic as its predecessor. Now, Resident Evil 2 introduces us to yet another couple of main protagonists who would go on to become pillars of the franchise. Namely, we have Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie cop at the Raccoon City Police Department, and then there's Claire Redfield, Chris's younger sister. Resident Evil 2 shares a few similarities with the first RE game in that players are given the choice to select which main character they're going to assume the role of. Leon and Claire each have their own supporting characters too. However, unlike the first Resident Evil game, there's not much difference between Claire and Leon's core gameplay mechanics. Resident Evil 2 has 4 different scenarios in total. 2 of them you can get playing as Leon and 2 of them playing as Claire. Thankfully, Capcom clarified which of these are actually canon, and those are Claire's so-called A scenario and Leon's B scenario. So I'm gonna focus on those for this video. With that out of the way, Resident Evil 2's tale starts a couple of months after the events of the first 2 chronological RE games. It's the 29th of September, 1998, and the T-virus has done a number on the Arklay Mountains and its surrounding vicinity. The area that took the brunt of this catastrophe was Raccoon City, which has more or less turned into a post-apocalyptic wasteland after the T-virus turned most of its inhabitants into zombies. And if this wasn't bad enough, wait until you hear that RE2 opens with Leon going on the first day of his job as a rookie officer with Raccoon City PD. Yikes. In any case, Leon and Claire meet at the onset of the story. Leon learns that Claire has been looking for her brother, Chris. But it doesn't take much time before the 2 heroes get separated. Going on their own separate journeys, both Leon and Claire decide to first head to Raccoon City PD. Our heroes soon discover that most of the cops working for the city have already been taken out. As for Claire, she also learns that Chris had already left for Europe in order to follow up a lead on the Umbrella Corporation. Afterwards, Claire and Leon get separated again as they attempt to search for survivors and ultimately find an escape route out of Raccoon City. Along the way, Claire comes across Sherry Birkin, a young girl who's been pursued by a literal monster. On the other hand, Leon meets Ada Wong, a super hot femme fatale, who says that she's been looking for her boyfriend, John, who happens to be an Umbrella Corporation employee. It would soon come to light that Raccoon City PD's own chief, Brian Irons, had some shady dealings with Umbrella Corp prior to the events of the game. The deal stated that Irons and Raccoon City PD would turn a blind eye to Umbrella Corp's gruesome experiments within the Arklay Mountains' immediate vicinity. On top of that, Irons was directly involved in covering up Umbrella Corp's crimes against humanity. And among all his shady underdealings lies the most notorious one: the fact that Irons was responsible for helping William Birkin keep knowledge about the G-Virus secret. Now, I've told you about the G-Virus earlier, so we're not going to get into it here. But what you should know is that Umbrella Corp isn't too happy about Birkin's side hustle. So they send out a tyrant to Raccoon City to deal with this new viral strain, which Leon ends up fighting. On the other hand, Irons attempts to take out Claire, but the corrupt cop ultimately becomes prey to a G-Virus monster. From there, our heroine and Sherry get separated after entering Raccoon City's sewage system. On the other hand, Leon and Ada split up, with Ada coming across Sherry. Ada manages to acquire Sherry's trinket, a pendant, after the little girl runs away. Later, Ada and Leon link up once more, and the duo encounters another woman who tries to put a bullet in Ada. However, Leon, being the charming hero that he is, takes a bullet for her. Instead of paying back the favor, Ada just leaves our boy to bleed out and instead goes with the same woman who just tried to shoot her. It's revealed that this lady happens to be Sherry's mom, Annette. Oh, and if you haven't figured it out yet, Sherry is William Birkin's daughter. Yes, the same William who developed the G-Virus. We then learn that William got the bright idea to infect himself with the G-Virus to prevent Umbrella Corp goons from getting their hands on his research. This effectively turned him into a grotesque mutant, the same monster that's been chasing Sherry this whole time. Annette soon spots Sherry's pendant and tries to take it from Ada. Ada refuses, and the two ladies get into a scuffle that ultimately leads to Annette getting thrown over a ledge. From there, Ada finds out that Sherry's locket actually holds a G-Virus specimen. Oh, and she finally starts acting right when she gets guilt-ridden over leaving Leon. So she goes back to our hero to help him with his gunshot wound. Somewhere else, Claire manages to locate Sherry, only to find out that her dad did something super gross. Specifically, William plans to use Sherry as a breeding sow, so he implanted an embryo inside the kid's body. Afterwards, our two main characters along with Ada and Sherry reach a dilapidated factory that leads straight to another Umbrella Corp lab. However, William soon spots Ada and attacks her, leading to her getting grievously wounded, prompting Leon to look for some meds at the Umbrella Corp facility. His search is cut short when Annette reemerges, and this lady has gone insane. She tells Leon that Ada has been lying through her teeth this whole time, that her relationship with her boyfriend John was all a ruse Ada was using in order to steal information about Umbrella Corp. According to Annette, Ada is actually a spy working for some kind of secret organization and is planning to sell the G-Virus to the highest bidder. Annette seemingly dies from her wounds after telling Leon this. As Leon reunites with Ada, she insists that Leon hand her the G-Virus sample he collected. And when Leon refuses, Ada pulls a gun on him and reveals her true intentions. However, just in time, Annette shows up and shoots her, sending Ada flying over the railing. Leon tries to catch her but ultimately fails. Before all of this, however, Annette managed to at least tell Claire the recipe for a special antidote that would prevent Sherry from mutating into a monster. With this information, Claire gathers all the needed ingredients for Sherry's vaccine and soon links up with Leon aboard a train that would lead them out of Raccoon City. They then vaccinate Sherry, and the little girl is cured. A final battle between the Tyrant and Leon transpires. This time, the Tyrant gets even more juiced out and becomes a so-called Super Tyrant. However, our hero is ultimately able to defeat the beast when an RPG suddenly appears in front of him. It's here we learn that Ada has somehow survived her fall and has decided to help Leon in the end by giving him this weapon. But even after defeating this Super Tyrant, our heroes aren't out of the woods just yet. This is because William tries to chase Leon, Claire, and Sherry once again. The insane mutated scientist finally meets his end when the locomotive blows up from its self-destruct sequence. Leon, Claire, and Sherry ultimately escape Raccoon City. Leon declares that he's going to bring down Umbrella Corps, while Claire goes on to continue looking for her older brother. What the duo doesn't know, however, is that a special Umbrella Corps operative, known only as Hunk, has successfully retrieved a sample of the G virus for his employers. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, September 28th through October 1st. Now, I'm going to talk about the next mainline Resident Evil game, 1999's Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Just like the two games that preceded its release, RE9 has since gone on to become a survival horror staple. So much so that it already had a modern-day remake back in 2020. Resident Evil 3 sees the return of Jill Valentine along with a new supporting character named Carlos Oliveira. You guys already know Jill's deal, so I'm just gonna gloss over Carlos here. The long and short of it is that Carlos is a soldier who originally worked for the UBCS, aka the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, which is basically Umbrella's own military. With that out of the way, Resident Evil 3's story begins as a sort of prequel to Resident Evil 2. It's the 28th of September, 1998, and as with the game that preceded it, Raccoon City is already an undead wasteland after Umbrella Corps' T-virus did a number on its citizens. Jill, who's still recovering from the PTSD she got from the events of RE1 and has since quit STARS, is minding her own business in her apartment when she's attacked by a seemingly superhuman creature in a trench coat. This assailant happens to be a Nemesis unit, which is a specially crafted T-virus mutant created with one specific purpose: to take out any and all remaining STARS operatives. Jill's old fellow STARS teammate Brad links up with her along the way, but the dude meets his end when they encounter a bunch of zombies. Still, Jill is able to escape Nemesis and is picked up by UBCS agent Carlos. Our heroine learns from Carlos that there are still a few other surviving members from his squad in Raccoon City, namely Tyrell Patrick, Nikolai Genovaev, and Mikhail Victor. Even better, they've taken it upon themselves to help evacuate the remaining Raccoon City survivors via its subway system. In turn, Jill aids Carlos and his UBCS squad mates in bringing back electricity to Raccoon City subway. After that's done, she, Mikhail, and Nikolai board a train and attempt to get out of the city. On the other hand, Carlos and Tyrell elect to stay behind in hopes of locating an Umbrella researcher named Dr. Nathaniel Bard, believing that this scientist has come up with a cure for the T-virus. Aboard the train, the UBCS operative's relationship begins to fracture when Mikhail starts to suspect that Nikolai might have betrayed them, which led to the majority of their crew getting slaughtered by Raccoon City's undead hordes. However, before they can resolve the situation, Nemesis suddenly catches up to the subway train and starts wreaking havoc. During the ensuing chaos, Nikolai screws Mikhail and Jill over by trapping them in one of the train cars so that he can save himself. So, Mikhail comes up clutch and sacrifices his life when he uses explosives to derail their subway train and ultimately prevent Nemesis from accomplishing its mission. Back in Raccoon City, Carlos and Tyrell learn that Bard is hiding out at a local hospital. At the same time, Jill gives Carlos a call and we find out that she has survived the train crash and is being chased by Nemesis once again. Jill ultimately manages to defeat the creature, but not before Nemesis infects our girl with the T-virus. 12 hours pass, and Carlos links up with Jill, who has lost consciousness by now due to the virus. He takes her to the same hospital where they believe Bard has holed up in hopes of finding a cure for her infection. The problem is, our heroes soon find out that Bard is already dead. After a bit of snooping around, Carlos discovers that Umbrella Corps was responsible for ordering Bard's execution, mainly because the company is doing everything in its power to wipe out any loose ends that may trace the T-virus back to them. On the bright side, Bard did leave behind samples of his T-virus vaccine, so Carlos is able to locate one of them and inject Jill with a dose of the cure. However, things get even more bleak for our heroes in Raccoon City as Tyrell then finds out that the United States government plans on nuking the entire city in order to stop the infection from spreading. Shortly after, Carlos reaches a laboratory just below the hospital and finds more of Bard's T-virus cure. Meanwhile, Tyrell desperately attempts to contact anyone outside Raccoon City who would be able to hold off the US government's planned bombing. Fast forward to October 1st, which is about a couple of days after the events of Resident Evil 2. Jill finally wakes up after recovering from her T-virus infection and links up with Carlos and Tyrell. Tyrell tells our heroine that the US government has cut a deal with them, that they're not going to proceed with their planned Raccoon City bombing if they could get their hands on a sample of Bard's vaccine. As they attempt to find more of the cure, Nemesis suddenly reemerges and takes out Tyrell. On the bright side, Jill is able to craft a vaccine sample. And more than that, she finds out that Nikolai is actually an agent working for one of Umbrella Corps' rival organizations. In fact, Nikolai's main mission was to sabotage Umbrella Corps' attempts to hide their involvement concerning this whole T-virus deal. And as a side quest, he was also tasked with gathering intel about Umbrella's various biological weapons. Things really get bad when Nikolai manages to steal Jill's vaccine sample. And true to his character, he traps Jill in a room with Nemesis, hoping that the creature would end her right then and there. However, Jill manages to get the better of her enemy when she gets her hands on a railgun and blows a hole through Nemesis. Our girl then proceeds to chase down Nikolai, and the two have one final confrontation on the hospital's helipad. In true villain fashion, Nikolai gets rid of the vaccine sample, pretty much dooming the entire city. Carlos then steps in and manages to subdue him, while Jill capitalizes on the situation by putting a bullet in Nikolai. But don't worry though, she didn't take him out just yet, because that would be letting him off too easily. Instead, Jill just incapacitates the dude before she and Carlos steal his helicopter. That way, Nikolai can just watch as the US government drops missiles on top of his head and all of Raccoon City, which happens as soon as Jill and Carlos fly to a safe distance. And in closing the scene of our story, Jill promises that she's going to destroy Umbrella Corps, no matter what it takes. Resident Evil Code Veronica, December 1998. Next up in Resident Evil's canon timeline is the now cult classic game entitled Resident Evil Code Veronica. This installment sees the return of both Claire and Chris Redfield, as the two siblings go on a journey looking for each other. Resident Evil Code Veronica also replaces the franchise's main setting up until this point, moving the story's location to the Mediterranean instead of the American Midwest. Its tale begins a couple of months after the conclusion of Resident Evil 3. It's December of 1998, and we see Claire infiltrating an Umbrella Corps lab somewhere in Paris. As before, she continues looking for Chris. Our heroine's mission goes haywire when Umbrella Corps security operatives capture and lock her up on Rockfort Island. Now, Rockfort Island is privately owned by Umbrella Corps, and they've turned the whole place into their very own illegal prison complex. Claire is rendered unconscious upon reaching Rockfort Island, and when our heroine comes to, she's surprised to find out that the same Umbrella security officer who caught her is now freeing her. That's because another T-virus outbreak happened on the island, and the guy had a change of heart, seeing all the chaos caused by Umbrella. So Claire tries to make her escape and soon links up with another Umbrella Corps prisoner named Steve Burnside. Just to give you a bit of background, Steve was sent to Rockfort along with his dad. That's because Steve's father used to be an Umbrella Corps employee who was caught auctioning off company information on the black market. As for Steve's mom, well, she got it worse. Umbrella just took her out after his dad was apprehended. Back to the story. Claire and Steve try to find a way off Rockfort Island. They eventually come face to face with Alfred Ashford, the island's assigned head honcho. It's not a normal meeting though, because Alfred is one crazy son of a gun who suffers from multiple personality disorder. On one hand, there's Alfred's original personality, and on the other hand, he tends to switch to his twin sibling's personality, a girl named Alexia. This is all rooted in the traumatic loss of his twin sister and their dysfunctional upbringing. In any case, Claire and Steve eventually manage to locate a plane that they could use to get off the island. The problem is that Alfred is able to catch up to our heroes. And being the nut job that he is, Alfred activates the plane's autopilot system. Fair play though, because Claire and Steve do get off Rockfort Island, only for the plane's autopilot to fly them all the way to another Umbrella Corps lab up in Antarctica. Much like Rockfort Island, Claire and Steve immediately find out that this Antarctic Umbrella facility has been overrun by the T-virus, turning everyone inside into either zombies or grotesque mutants. Still, the duo finds another way to get off this frozen region, and along the way they finally permanently deal with Alfred. A twist occurs when it's revealed that Alexia, Alfred's sister, is actually alive. We find out that Alexia has been put in cryogenic stasis after she inoculated herself with a variant of the T-virus known as the T. Veronica virus. Unlike the original T-virus, the T. Veronica variant was created by Alexia herself. And remember Veronica Ashford, the lady I mentioned all the way back in the beginning of our video? Yep, Alexia and Alfred are her descendants. In fact, Alexia named her new viral strain after their family's great matriarch as an homage. Now, the T. Veronica virus is different from its predecessor in that it was formulated to have the same infectious potency but without the side effect of turning its host into mindless zombies. The T. Veronica, instead, allows its host body to more or less retain its consciousness and cognitive abilities. Now, Alfred, who's about to take his last breath after confronting our two heroes, manages to perform one final act of chaos when he awakens Alexia from cryogenic stasis. Alfred bites the dust, Alexia wakes up, and she accosts Claire and Steve before they could escape the facility. The story then shifts its focus to Chris, as he sets foot on Rockford Island in hopes of locating Claire. He got a lead about this location after meeting Leon, who relayed a message from his little sister. Chris ultimately learns that Claire had already gotten off Rockford Island, leaving him with one burning question: where did she go now? So Chris starts looking for clues that would lead him to his sister. Our action hero soon comes across STAR's Alpha Team leader, Wesker, who has since started working as an independent operator after the events of the first RE game. This time, Wesker is on a mission to grab a sample of Alexia's T. Veronica virus. Chris eventually finds out that Claire is in Antarctica. At the same time, Wesker also becomes aware that he can find what he's looking for in Antarctica as well. From there, the two men each make their own way to the Antarctic facility, where Chris soon saves Claire from captivity. The two siblings are reunited, but they're not ready to get off this frozen hellhole just yet, because Claire has taken it upon herself to look for Steve. Chris, being the good brother that he is, joins Claire on this quest. They eventually manage to locate Steve, only to find out that Alexia has used the poor dude as her personal guinea pig, infecting him with the T. Veronica virus. This causes Steve to mutate into a monster, but given the T. Veronica's specs, he's ultimately able to reclaim his consciousness before he could take out Claire. So, Steve tries fighting Alexia instead, but this only leads to his death. Not too far away, Chris and Wesker link up again to deal with Alexia, and, well, everybody sort of wins. Chris is able to take out the T. Veronica virus-mutated scientist, while Wesker manages to escape with Steve's lifeless mutant body to accomplish his mission. In the end, Claire and Chris make it out of the Antarctic facility just in time before it explodes from, you guessed it, its self-destruct protocol. Resident Evil 4, 2004. Now, before we get into explaining this specific game, we need to take a step back and see what happened to Leon after the events of Resident Evil 2. The last time we saw him, Leon had made a solemn vow to make sure Umbrella pays for its crimes. And it's at Resident Evil 4's onset where we learn that Leon has since quit the police force to become a special agent working directly under the federal government of the United States. And in the intervening years between the events of Raccoon City and the present day, Leon has been trained by an elite military officer named Jack Krauser. Now, Resident Evil 4's tale begins when Leon receives his latest mission, a direct command from the President of the United States, involving the retrieval of his abducted daughter named Ashley Graham. With the help of fellow U.S. federal agent Ingrid Hunnigan, Leon soon finds himself at a remote village somewhere in Spain. Things immediately get dicey when he finds that his guides have suddenly been taken out by the local villagers in an exceedingly grim fashion. Now, you guys remember when I told you about that ancient parasitic species Las Plagas earlier in the video? Well, Leon soon finds out that the villagers of this rural area have been infected with it. What's more is that they're a part of a freaky ancient cult, Los Illuminados. With his mission becoming exceedingly more dangerous, Leon wastes no time locating Ashley. He comes across a former Umbrella researcher who's currently being hunted down by Los Illuminados too, a man going by the name of Luis Serra. Things take a dark turn when both Leon and Luis are accosted by the village chief, Vitores Mendez. And to make matters even worse, Mendez infects Leon with Las Plagas. Our hero and his fugitive friend eventually escape Mendez's clutches and split up afterwards, allowing Leon to go back to his mission. Soon enough, Leon gets information that Ashley is currently being held within the village's church. He heads there, and after a bit of grueling confrontations with more of these crazy cultists, Leon eventually locates his target and rescues her. The problem is, Ashley has also been infected by Las Plagas. In any case, Leon and Ashley attempt to make their escape from this super crappy village, and Mendez pursues them. Leon finally gets rid of this pesky village chief, but the duo's extraction ends up getting delayed when Leon receives word that the helicopter that's supposed to pick them up can't fly over the village until the weather clears up. So, Leon and Ashley hole up at the local castle, only for its lord, Raymond Salazar, to take Ashley hostage. Still, Leon's day gets a little better when he comes across his acquaintance from Raccoon City, Ada Wong. The two lovebirds separate as soon as they meet up with each other though, because Ada has her own stuff to deal with. More on that later. Back to Leon. Our hero straps on his boots and gets to work retrieving Ashley yet again. He gets some good news when he manages to reunite with Luis in an underground cavern, who hands him an antidote that can suppress his Las Plagas infection as a way to make up for his wrongdoings back when he was still a part of Umbrella. From there, Leon and Luis work together to find a way out of the caverns. But Luis soon meets his end when they come into contact with Leon's old mentor, Jack Krauser. You see, prior to the start of Resident Evil 4, Krauser had pretty much become a disgraced military officer and subsequently taken early retirement after a botched operation somewhere in South America in 2002. And now Krauser has found new employment with the so-called Third Organization, the same rival company that has been a thorn in Umbrella's side since Resident Evil 0. So Krauser has been sent to this village primarily to retrieve a sample of Las Plagas. A scuffle erupts between Krauser and Leon, but Luis is able to convince our hero to fall back instead. And before taking his last breath, Luis does Leon a solid by handing him the key to his own laboratory so our hero and Ashley can grab a cure that would get rid of their Las Plagas infection. Leon then goes back to Salazar's castle to bring back Ashley, and it's here he gets into a battle with Salazar himself. Leon wins, and he soon reunites with Ada. Ada helps our guy hunt down Krauser, who has abducted Ashley and taken her to a facility on another island. More action ensues when they reach the island, and Leon ultimately retrieves Ashley. This time though, Los Illuminados leader Osmond Settler stands in their path. Settler reveals that he plans on sending Ashley back to her dad so that she could infect the President of the United States with Las Plagas, which would then allow him to rule over the world. The confrontation gets even more heated when Settler uses Las Plagas to assume control of Ashley and subdue Leon. The duo is separated yet again, so Leon is forced to go back to square one and look for Ashley once more. Another revelation emerges when Leon finds out that it was Krauser who originally abducted Ashley as a way to get revenge for his forced retirement from active service in the United States government. And if you were wondering about this fateful mission in South America, all you should know is that it was called Operation Javier, and it ultimately led to Krauser's entire unit getting wiped out. Anyway, Krauser then goes crazy and infects himself with Las Plagas, initiating a mutation that turns him into an inhuman beast. Leon and Krauser get into one final duel, and our hero emerges victorious in the end. Leon then wastes no time getting Ashley back, but Sattler pursues them and tries to take out our hero. Ada arrives on the scene to help out her old lover, which gives Leon and Ashley an opening to reach Luis' lab and inject themselves with the cure for their infection. Leon then rushes back to Ada's side, and the two manage to finally put a stop to Sattler. Sattler drops a vial of fossilized plaga upon his death, which Ada then picks up before making her exit aboard a helicopter. As for Leon and Ashley, they manage to spot a jet ski and ride off the island to safety. Oh, and the island explodes at the end of Resident Evil 4 because why not? It's pretty much tradition for the series at this point. Resident Evil 4 Separate Ways, 2004. Now, RE4's main storyline might have come to a close, but its saga doesn't end there. We also get the Separate Ways story DLC, which focuses on what Ada had been up to before Leon arrived at the village and during the events of the main RE4 storyline. Separate Ways opens with Ada freeing Luis from Salazar's clutches in exchange for a vial of fossilized plaga that he had stashed away for her. But things take a dark turn when one of Salazar's trusted underlings, Presanta, infects Ada with a special strain of Las Plagas while she's on her way to retrieve the fossil. In the meantime, Ada makes her way to her and Luis' rendezvous point, where she eventually spots Leon and begins secretly helping him fight Los Illuminados from the shadows. We soon find out that Ada is currently working with Wesker, and he's getting antsy about this whole mission. If that's not bad enough, the plaga inside Ada's body is gradually spreading. Not long after, Ada manages to reunite with Luis and grab the plaga fossil, who realizes that she's been infected. So, Luis sends her on a fetch quest to collect ingredients for a suppressant he could cook up to help not just her, but also Leon and Ashley. Ada does this, and Luis soon crafts the antidote. But another problem arises when Ada realizes that her infection becomes stronger whenever the plaga fossil is near. So, Ada hands it back to Luis for the time being while she waits for the antidote to take effect. In the meantime, Ada hunts down Pisanta and takes him out. Even better, Ada gets rid of her plaga infection when she throws it up after her confrontation with Pisanta, and then goes on to reunite with Luis, only to discover that Krauser had already murdered the poor scientist, and even worse, he's stolen the fossilized plaga. As in the main storyline, Ada reconnects with Leon and they head over to Krauser's island hideout. What Leon doesn't know, however, is that Ada placed a tracker on him before they split up. Ada soon spots Krauser and sees him giving the plaga fossil to Sadler. Wesker gives Ada a call and helps her get through the island's security systems. But then Ada also soon learns that Wesker is planning to blow up the entire island. So she rummages through Luis' research files and discovers a way to sabotage Wesker's explosives. She then uses her tracker to locate Leon, knowing that he's going to inevitably find Sadler. The rest of the Separate Ways DLC pretty much plays out as it did in the main RE4 storyline. But what we do learn here is that Ada gives Wesker a call after she boards her helicopter. She asks him what he plans on doing with the plaga fossil, and Wesker answers by saying that he aims to bring about a new age. However, it will come at the price of billions of innocent human lives. Ada isn't really on board with Wesker's crazy supervillain scheme, prompting her to tell the helicopter pilot to change their course. Separate Ways closes with Wesker finding out that Ada has betrayed him. On top of that, not all of the explosives he placed on the island were detonated, thanks to Ada's intervention. But the big reveal comes when we find out that Wesker has retrieved Krauser's lifeless, plaga-infected body and declares that the so-called Age of Man is about to come to its close. Resident Evil Revelations 2005. Set right around the end of RE4's events, Revelation's story opens when a notorious bioterror group known as Il Vetro lays siege to Terra Grigia, a city located somewhere in the Mediterranean region. They didn't just come in with guns blazing though. These scumbags released BOWs, aka biological organic weapons, to do the job. Now, Il Vetro's attack was spurred on by the fact that Terra Grigia's government had been pushing the development of an orbital satellite-powered solar energy relay system, something which Il Vetro was extremely opposed to. In turn, a relatively new United States government agency founded after the tragedy at Raccoon City, known as the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, aka FBC, makes moves on Terra Grigia to try and save the city. The FBC's attempts to bring some good old-fashioned American peace and justice to the region fall short though, as the agency can barely keep up with Il Vetro's offensive. So, they go with the classic US tactic of just nuking the city instead. Specifically, Morgan Lansdale, the FBC's director, gives out the order to use the same orbital satellite for the city's solar energy as a weapon of mass destruction that ends up leveling all of Terra Grigia. A couple of FBC operatives named Jessica Shurawat and Parker Luciani make it out of the doomed city just before the satellite blasts it with solar rays. And 12 months later, both Jessica and Parker have decided to become a part of an entirely new organization, the BSAA, aka the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance. From there, Parker teams up with another BSAA operative and one of the Resident Evil icons, Jill Valentine, on a mission to check in on what remains of Terra Grigia. This is all because there have been reports that there are BOWs that have appeared in the region. On top of that, we also learned that Chris Redfield has become a part of the BSAA since his last outing. The problem is, Chris and his partner Jessica have gone missing in action after going on a mission to investigate rumors about the reemergence of Il Vetro. This is all according to BSAA's chief, Clive R. O'Brien. So Jill and Parker have a twofold quest. One, see if there really are new BOWs in the ruined city of Terra Grigia. And two, look for their fellow BSA agents Chris and Jessica. The duo is then debriefed about Chris and Jessica's last known whereabouts, a dilapidated cruise ship named the Queen Zenobia. Jill and Parker head over to the Queen Zenobia and do some digging. It is business as usual for the BSAA agents until they learn that Chris is seemingly being held hostage in one of the rooms on the ship. However, that's not really the case, and the duo ends up getting knocked out by an unknown attacker. Somewhere else, Chris and Jessica are revealed to be fine and are actually carrying on with their original mission. The pair gets confirmation that El Vitro has indeed reemerged, and they're currently holed up at an airstrip near the Terra Grigian Mountains. From there, they receive a call from Chief O'Brien, who informs them that the initial intel he got was faulty at best. So he tells the pair to go search for Jill and Parker, while he sends out a different duo of BSAA agents named Keith Lumley and Quint Ketchum to follow up on their lead on Il Vitro. While all this is happening, Jill and Parker regain consciousness and find themselves still aboard the Queen Zenobia. The plot thickens when they encounter an FBC operative named Raymond Vester, who keeps quiet when he's asked why he's on the same cruise ship. Then, we finally learn a bit about Il Vitro's true intentions when Jill and Parker witness a video detailing their plans. As it turns out, Il Vitro possesses a brand spanking new strain of the T-virus called the T-Abyss, and they're aiming to use it on 1/5 of the world's oceans as revenge for what the FBC did to their men during the siege of Terra Grigia. Now, the T-Abyss virus might sound like a totally imposing name compared to its predecessors, but all you should know about this particular strain is that it's basically the T-virus, but with a more aquatic name. That is to say, the mutations that happen to any human who gets infected with it take on the form of deep-sea creatures. In addition to that, the T-Abyss virus is purported to self-replicate at a faster rate, given its compatibility with marine life. Back to our story. Jessica and Chris soon manage to head to the Queen Zenobia, where they come across Raymond, who impersonates an Il Vitro operative. Whether this was a good idea or not, I can't tell you, but what ends up happening is Jessica shooting Raymond. Shortly afterward, Chris and Jessica reunite with Jill and Parker. From there, the BSAA agents split up, with Jill and Chris partnering to go and search for the T-Abyss virus processing lab on the Queen Zenobia. They eventually locate it and sabotage the T-Abyss stash to prevent it from leaking into the ocean. But then the big twist comes when FBC Director Lansdale makes his presence known and reveals that he was actually in cahoots with Il Vitro. This dates back to the whole Terra Grigia incident, with Lansdale stating that he partnered up with Il Vitro to give the FBC a target, which in turn would help his organization gain more clout in the US government and ultimately allow the FBC to secure global influence and funding. What's more is that Parker soon finds out that Jessica has actually been a spy working for the FBC this entire time. Parker tries to accost Jessica, but the traitor reaches for the classic self-destruct sequence and makes her escape. Chris and Jill are able to get off the Queen Zenobia before it blows up, while Parker is seemingly killed in the explosion. In the aftermath, BSAA Chief O'Brien reveals that he pretty much manipulated his agents into going on their most recent missions to ultimately uncover Lansdale's dealings with Il Vitro. We find out that the agents O'Brien sent to investigate the Il Vitro hideout, Keith and Quint, have gained intel about Lansdale sinking another ship in the Terra Grisian region to erase any evidence that could link him to the terror group. Everything seems cut and dry until Lansdale gets the jump on the BSAA and takes O'Brien into custody. On the other hand, Chris and Jill had already been sent on a mission to check out this new sunken ship prior to O'Brien's arrest. Along the way, our heroes come across Jack Norman, the leader of Il Vitro and a survivor of the Terra Grigia incident. He managed to live through the solar ray attack by infecting himself with the T-Abyss. And, well, he plans on releasing video evidence of Lansdale's dealings with his terror group. The problem is, Jack has become a bit insane. So instead of just outing the corrupt FBC official, the dude also gets into a scuffle with Jill and Chris, which leads to his downfall. On the bright side, Chris and Jill get their hands on Lansdale's footage and promptly release it. This results in O'Brien being cleared from any false accusations, the FBC getting shut down, and Lansdale being brought to justice. Even better, the funding that was supposed to go to the FBC is transferred to the BSAA, allowing it to expand its operations. More good news comes when it's revealed that Parker survived the Queen Zenobia explosion. Not only that, but he was saved by none other than Raymond, who also survived his gunshot wound. And finally, O'Brien quits the BSAA, taking responsibility for the shady tactics he used to reveal Lansdale's corruption. And we get up to speed with Jessica, who has a secret meeting with Raymond. He hands her a T-Abyss virus sample, and when she asks him why he rescued Parker from the Queen Zenobia explosion, all he says is that he has his own reasons for doing so. Resident Evil Revelations ends with a sequence where we see Jill and Chris on a mission to sneak into the home of Oswell E. Spencer, one of Umbrella Corps' co-founders, which directly ties into the next game in the timeline, Resident Evil 5 Lost Nightmares. 2006. As I already said, Lost Nightmares events are a direct continuation of RE Revelation's epilogue section for Jill and Chris. This story begins with a brief flashback showing that the BSAA has recently received intel about the location of one of Umbrella Corps' surviving co-founders, Oswell E. Spencer. So Chris and Jill are sent to retrieve and extract the old man from his private estate. And as we saw in RE Revelation's closing scenes, Chris and Jill have reached Spencer's house only to find out that his whole security detail had already been taken out. What's more is that Chris and Jill can't help but recognize how eerily similar this place is to the OG Spencer mansion they survived all the way back during the events of RE1. In any case, our heroes get into the usual encounters with monstrous creatures until they eventually reach Oswell's office. But then another big twist comes when they find out that the old man has already been killed. The culprit? None other than their old STARS commanding officer and iconic RE villain, Wesker. Of course, the duo attempt to take Wesker into custody, but our heroes are ultimately defeated, and Wesker even finds an opening to give Chris a life-ending blow. In response, Jill comes up clutch and tackles Wesker away from her partner before the villain could strike him. Jill and Wesker are thrown out of Oswell's office window and down a cliff. Chris survives and looks on, believing that Jill's gone forever. But is she really? Resident Evil 5, 2009. We turn the clock forward to 2009, when the main storyline of RE5 begins. The game opens with Chris traveling to West Africa's Kijuju region on a mission from the BSAA. It's here where he meets Shiva Alamar, a fellow BSAA operative working for their organization's West African branch. Their primary objective is to apprehend a man named Ricardo Irving. See, Ricardo is basically this rich guy who serves as the director of an oil field owned by an organization known as Tricell. Tricell, for all intents and purposes, happens to be one of Umbrella Corps' rival companies. They're equally as shady and scummy as you'd expect. And like any 1%er, Ricardo also happens to have his hands in the black market, primarily dealing in bioweapons. In fact, this is the main reason why he's wanted by the BSAA. Chris and Sheva soon arrive at a village only to find out that its residents have all been infected by Las Plagas. Yep, the same pesky parasite from Resident Evil 4. Even worse, the advanced squad that the BSAA sent to this place, Alpha Team, has already been wiped out by these mutated locals. So our heroes battle and fend off their attackers until another BSAA squad, Delta Team, which is led by Sheva's former mentor, Captain Josh Stone, rescues them. Stone shows our heroes the intel Delta Team has gathered about Ricardo, and to Chris's surprise, he discovers that it includes a picture of Jill, who's pretty much revealed to still be alive at this point. However, they have more pressing matters to attend to, so the duo and Delta Team proceed with their mission to nab Ricardo. They soon locate their target, but the notorious black market arms dealer escapes custody when he's rescued by a mysterious person wearing a mask and a hood. On the bright side, Chris and Sheva do manage to acquire Ricardo's files after his escape, which directs them to an oil field where the bioweapons transaction is supposed to go down. The problem is, it turns out that this was a diversion all along. This whole debacle ultimately leads to Delta Team getting wiped out by a gigantic bioweapon. Sheva receives a glimmer of hope when she notices that Stone's body isn't at the scene of the slaughter. On the other hand, Chris decides to keep everything that's happened a secret from the BSAA for now, or at least until he learns the truth about what really happened to Jill. The duo soon catches a break when they find out Stone is indeed still alive. They regroup and continue their hunt for Ricardo, which leads them to the man's boat. A high-octane battle erupts when Ricardo infects himself with Las Plagas, which transforms him into a monster. Things go boom, and our heroes eventually manage to defeat him. And like a classic supervillain, Ricardo can't help but run his mouth before dying, which allows Chris and Sheva to discover the location of a cave where Umbrella used to source their Stairway of the Sunblooms, the same flowers that play host to the T-virus. On top of that, this whole chain of events leads our heroes to find out about an entirely new viral strain known as Ouroboros. Now, Ouroboros is a virus that was designed by none other than Albert Wesker. Remember that whole scene where he goes all, "The age of man is about to end," at the conclusion of Resident Evil 4? Well, this is the result of that. Wesker created Ouroboros to basically kickstart what he believes is the next step of human evolution. You see, this virus typically kills its host and turns them into undead monsters. But remember the start of this video where I told you about that prehistoric Ndipayan king who gained superhuman abilities after getting the progenitor virus in his body? Well, Ouroboros works similar to that. It can either turn you into a monster or turn you into Superman. The thing is, this ancient Ndipayan king had a unique genetic trait that meshed well with the progenitor virus, which ultimately turned him into a superhuman. Wesker basically plans to weed out the human population until only those destined to be superhumans remain. Back to our story. Chris and Sheva also become aware of the fact that the same company Ricardo works for, Tricell, has acquired Umbrella's assets and has since been continuing their research into bioorganic weapons development. This leads our heroes to a former Umbrella-owned lab that Tricell now controls. It's here they discover that Tricell has been using test subjects in their bioweapons experiments. Oh, and also we get the big reveal that Jill actually became one of these test subjects when Chris spots a pod with her name on it. The problem is, Jill herself isn't inside. Our heroes soon find out that Tricell's head honcho, Excellagione, has been scheming with Wesker to drop missiles loaded with the Ouroboros virus all over the world. So Chris and Sheva get to work to chase down Excella, which puts them in a confrontation with Wesker and the same masked figure who rescued Ricardo before. Then comes the big reveal. It turns out that this mysterious character is none other than Jill, who has since been brainwashed by Wesker and Tricell with a convenient little gadget. Wesker and Excella escape our heroes' clutches, leaving Jill to deal with them. The duo manages to subdue their old comrade and remove Wesker's brain control device. And there you have it, Jill's back. Jill then stays behind after telling Chris to bring Wesker down, which leads him and Sheva to an oil tanker. Here, they first come across Excella, but the CEO escapes once again after using a case of syringes as a diversion. Sheva gathers a few of these syringes before continuing their hunt. They eventually arrive on the tanker's main deck where Wesker uses the intercom to tell our heroes that he's already screwed over Excella and put some of that sweet Ouroboros virus in her. So Excella turns into a monster and the duo promptly deals with her. To help Chris and Sheva, Jill gives them a call to tell the duo that Wesker needs the exact dose of a certain serum to maintain his own superhuman abilities. That is to say, underdosing or overdosing this dude with his concoction would end up taking him down. Sheva realizes that the syringes she picked up from Excella's case earlier happen to be the same serum that Wesker uses. So, our heroes now have an advantage against their enemy. They soon confront Wesker just as he's about to fly off a bomber plane containing his Ouroboros-loaded missiles and proceed to overdose him with the serum. The villain still attempts to fly out of there, but the duo manages to sabotage the plane, which crashes into a volcano. Of course, Wesker's not going out without a fight, so he goes absolutely nuts and infects himself with Ouroboros to try and take out our heroes. Another high-octane battle ensues, and the duo ultimately prevails. Oh, and we also learn that Chris can move huge boulders just by punching them, which makes you wonder, did this guy get on Ouroboros as well? Anyway, in the aftermath, Chris, Sheva, and Jill reunite, presumably high-fiving each other for a job well done. Resident Evil 5: Desperate Escape. In this DLC, we basically find out what Jill had been up to after Chris and Sheva freed her from Wesker's mind control. Now, I won't dive too deep into this DLC, but all you should know is that this side story begins right in the aftermath of Jill's rescue and runs alongside the events of the main RE5 story. Desperate Escape sees Jill teaming up with Delta Team's Captain Josh Stone as they make their escape from the Tricell facility where Chris and Sheva initially reunited with her. As you'd expect, the two are forced to deal with hordes of Las Plagas-infected citizens. And it's in this story where Jill learns about Wesker's precise serum dosage requirements that eventually led to the villain's defeat. It concludes with Jill and Josh escaping the Tricell facility and heading toward Chris and Sheva's location, which is around the same time that the duo are battling Wesker. Resident Evil Revelations 2. Moving on to the next entry into Resident Evil's universe, we have 2015's Resident Evil Revelations 2. Now, it's important to mention that this game has pretty much nothing to do with the other Revelations game. It's not a direct sequel to it, and it also has a completely different cast of characters. That said, Revelations 2's story shifts between a couple of main characters. First, there's the returning classic RE character, Claire Redfield, and then there's Barry Burton, the same STARS operative from the first Resident Evil game. Our story begins with Claire as we find out that she has started working for a company called TerraSave after the events of Resident Evil Code Veronica. TerraSave is an agency dedicated to the prevention of biological hazards. Claire also happens to be colleagues with Moira Burton, Barry's daughter. One fateful day at a work party, Claire, Moira, and their fellow TerraSave employees are suddenly abducted by a squad of armed goons. The two women are then brought to a research facility on Sane Island. They eventually wake up and start exploring the facility. However, it doesn't take long before Claire and Moira are attacked by mutants dubbed the Afflicted. Unknown to our heroines, an as yet unnamed lady known only as the Overseer has been keeping an eye on them. The Overseer speaks to Claire and Moira through the facility's intercom, telling them that they've basically become part of an experiment meant to measure and record fear levels, which are gathered through bracelets that they've been strapped with. Claire and Moira make a desperate run for it in an attempt to escape until they reach a radio tower. Moira then uses its systems to contact her dad. Barry receives Moira's message and shortly after, successfully travels to Sane Island. There, he meets Natalia Corda, a peculiar young girl who has the weird power to psychically sense the island's creatures. Natalia helps Barry get to the radio tower, and it's here we get the big twist of this story. It turns out that the message Moira sent to Barry was relayed half a year ago. Even more alarming is when Natalia suddenly has a splitting headache before telling Barry that Moira has already died. Shifting back 6 months prior to Barry's arrival on Sane Island, we continue on where we left with Claire and Moira's story. We soon find out that the duo regrouped with a couple of their TerraSave coworkers named Gabrielle and Pedro. It's here that the Overseer reveals to them that she and her company are using Claire, Moira, and their friends as test subjects for the development of a new virus called the T-Phobos. Now, I'm not going to give too much away about the T-Phobos just yet, so all I'll tell you right now is that it's a weird virus that reacts to fear. Afterwards, Gabriel takes the group to a broken helicopter he found earlier. He aims to fix it and use the aircraft to fly them off Sane Island. But crap hits the fan when a horde of Afflicted ambushes the group. We then get the reveal that the T-Phobos actually transforms you into a grotesque monster when you reach a certain level of fear. Because this is exactly what happens to Pedro when he starts to freak out after the attack. So Claire and Moira band together to defend themselves against both Pedro and the Afflicted horde. The battle stops only when Neil Fisher, their boss at TerraSave, reaches the scene and rescues the duo. The women soon meet Natalia and become friends with the little girl. Somewhere else, Gabriel successfully repairs the helicopter and begins to fly off the island when the Overseer remotely tinkers with its controls. It crashes, and Gabriel loses his life in the process. Meanwhile, Claire and Moira hear the crash from a distance, which allows the Overseer to abduct Natalia while they're distracted. You see, the Overseer plans on using this little girl as a new vessel for her consciousness. Fast forward to the present, Natalia escorts Barry to the last place she says she saw Myra, the Overseer's Tower HQ. More details about her past come to light as they make the trek, such as the fact that Natalia happens to be a child of a couple of people who perished during the tragedy at Terra Grigia. This resulted in Natalia becoming so traumatized that she literally can't experience fear at all. They soon enter the tower where Barry spots a portrait of his old STARS teammate, Albert Wesker. In that same portrait is a woman who Natalia tells Barry is Alex Wesker. All of a sudden, the Overseer emerges from the shadows and attacks them. It's here where it's revealed that the Overseer happens to be none other than Alex. Except she's not a hot evil scientist like in the portrait anymore. She now looks like a hag with a humpback. Rewind to 6 months ago and we see Claire and Moira traveling to a factory after reading a note that Neil left telling them to head over there. However, instead of regrouping with their boss, Claire and Moira are greeted by a series of deadly booby traps. The duo makes it through the ordeal and eventually reaches the island's sewers before entering the Overseer's tower. Upon snooping around, the women learn that their boss, Neil, is actually in league with Alex. In fact, Neil happens to be an ex-FBC agent, and he's actually the one who came up with the plan to abduct Claire, Moira, and the other TerraSave employees. He did this as part of a deal he made with Alex. All he had to do was bring her new test subjects, and in exchange, he would get a sample of Albert Wesker's old Ouroboros virus. However, Alex screws him over and instead infects him with the Ouroboros. Neil mutates into a freaky beast, and Claire and Moira take him out afterwards. Back to present day, Barry and Natalia manage to escape Alex by going through the sewers and emerging outside of the tower. Barry then shares a story about Moira's past to Natalia. about how she accidentally shot her baby sister, Polly, with his own gun back when they were kids. This chapter in their lives caused his relationship with Moira to strain, and although Polly survived the gunshot, this series of events made Moira develop a phobia of guns. Later, Barry and Natalia go through an abandoned, monster-ridden mine on the island. They almost find an exit, but Alex reemerges and ambushes them. Barry is thrown off a ravine, while Alex captures the little girl and prepares to take her out. However, Alex suddenly tucks tail and runs when Natalia uses her weird powers against her. Flashback to half a year ago. Claire and Moira prepare to bring the fight to Alex at the tower shortly after dealing with their traitorous boss. During the fateful confrontation, they find out that Alex's primary motivation for all this T-Phobos drama is to pretty much gain immortality. Alex then takes herself out with a gun, which triggers, you guessed it, a self-destruct sequence. Claire and Moira try to escape while the tower crumbles all around them, but things get extra dicey when we find out that Alex has started to feel fear in her dying moments, which sparks her transformation into a monster. Meanwhile, Claire and Moira scamper in order to reach the exit. Knowing that they won't both make it out of the tower, Moira helps Claire escape at the cost of her own life. And here's where we get another twist in the story. It's revealed that Claire actually talked to Barry not long after being rescued from the island. At the time, she told him that Moira had died during their escape. So yeah, Barry knew this all along but still decided to come to the island and look for his daughter. Back to Barry's story. We learn that he and Natalia reunited and are now traveling through the mine's toxic tunnels. They eventually arrive in Alex's research lab. Barry and Natalia confront Alex once more. This time, Alex infects herself with a dose of Ouroboros, which triggers another grotesque mutation. They get into a scuffle, and Alex seemingly perishes. However, only a moment later, Alex springs back to action and gets Barry out of the way before going for Natalia again. Now, Resident Evil Revelations 2 has a couple of endings, but as with the previous games, we're lucky enough that there is a specific canonical conclusion to this tale. In its climactic sequence, it's revealed that Moira actually survived the collapse of Alex's tower. She arrives on the scene just in time to rescue Natalia before they escape the place. Alex gives chase and ends up cornering the trio, only for Claire to reach them with a helicopter and whisk them away from the island. Oh, and don't worry about Alex because they blow her to bits with a bazooka before they leave. In the closing scene, Barry and Moira have a nice little reunion, and the old man decides to formally adopt Natalia when they get back to the US. And although that's the end of the main story of Resident Evil Revelations 2, this game also came with a couple of additional side episodes. First, there's one called Little Miss, which is set shortly before Barry's arrival on Sane Island. In this one, we're introduced to Natalia's other personality, simply known as Dark Natalia. And as the name suggests, Dark Natalia is an evil version of the little girl. If nothing else, Little Miss introduces us to the idea that Natalia is fighting her own inner demons. Then there's the other side episode called The Struggle, which details how Moira spent her time between surviving the tower's collapse and reuniting with her dad at the end of the main storyline. It's here we learn that Moira was actually rescued by a Russian inhabitant of the island named Yevgeny Rebich. From there, Moira and Yevgeny started working together to keep surviving on the island. However, Yevgeny meets his end when he succumbs to depression after learning that his daughter Irina was one of the poor souls that Alex Wesker had kidnapped in the past and used as a test subject, which ultimately led to her death. Shortly after Yevgeny's demise, Moira becomes resolute in getting off the island, which ultimately leads to the canonical ending of Resident Evil Revelations 2. Resident Evil 6. Next up in our Resident Evil timeline is Resident Evil 6. And let's just say this is the game that forced Capcom to rethink their approach to the entire franchise. Resident Evil 5 had already strayed far from the series' survival horror roots and leaned more toward pure action. Well, Resident Evil 6 pushed this even further, ultimately leaving us with a game that is not really horror anymore. It's basically an action shooter with zombies. This particular title features a quartet of main characters. In addition to that, each of the main characters in this game has their own storyline that's all interconnected with one another. Now, you're probably already familiar with the first three protagonists in the game: Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, and Ada Wong. But then there's the fourth main character of the piece, Jake Muller. Now, Jake happens to be a formidable mercenary in the Resident Evil universe. Oh, and he's also the son of the late Albert Wesker. We also see the return of Sherry Birkin in this game. You might remember her as that cute little girl that Claire rescued all the way back in Resident Evil 2. Well, she's all grown up now and is working for a United States government organization called the Division of Security Operations, aka DSO. All that aside, let's start with Jake's tale. When we first meet this dude, he serves as a hired gun working with freedom fighters in the Eastern European nation of Edonia. It's business as usual for Jake until these strange nutritional supplements are introduced to their rebel group. And yeah, these things actually carry a new contagion known as the C virus. And in what seems like the blink of an eye, their rebel camp at Edonia turns into a mutant-infested hellhole after people start ingesting these nutritional supplements. Curiously though, Jake does not transform in spite of the fact that he had swallowed some of the pills. Jake soon meets Sherry, who tells him that these fake supplements actually contain the C virus. In addition to that, this particular virus was created by a bioterrorist organization known as Neo Umbrella. Now, without giving too much away, Neo Umbrella is a rogue offshoot of another shady secret society in the Resident Evil universe. It's called The Family, and I actually mentioned them all the way at the beginning of this video. Anyway, the reason that Neo Umbrella sprang from the Family was primarily due to a difference in opinion. You see, the Family is basically like a billionaire boys club who want nothing other than world domination. On the other hand, Neo Umbrella was founded when a few members of this secret society aspired for something much spicier: the apocalypse. Anyway, what Sherry really came here for is a pitch. So she tries to convince Jake to come with her to the United States. That's because our boy's DNA might just hold the key to finding a cure for the C virus, given his immunity to it. Now, the C virus, aka the chrysalis virus, is basically what happens when you combine William Birkin's G virus with Alexia Ashford's T Veronica virus. This results in an even beefier, juiced-out contagion that's more potent than its predecessors. For one, the C virus has the ability to pretty much revive dead tissue even if its host has been dead for centuries. On top of that, this creepy contagion can also cause mutations similar to what the G virus does. Plus, thanks to its T Veronica strain heritage, the C virus also allows its mutated hosts to maintain a degree of their cognitive functions. So yeah, all things considered, the C virus is bad news for the World Health Organization and everyone who doesn't want to become a grotesque undead monster. Back to our story. Jake shows that he is quite a smartass when he accepts Sherry's request in exchange for $50 million. Despite this, Sherry agrees to the deal. So, the duo soon make their way to the DSO's designated extraction point. Sniffing out the duo's movements, Neo Umbrella sends out a grotesque beast called the Ustanik to hunt down Jake and Sherry. So what's supposed to be a simple pickup mission turns into a deadly chase between our two heroes and this weird monster. Along the way, Sherry and Jake encounter Chris Redfield, who then helps them gain some distance from the monster using a helicopter. But the Ustanik is a professional if nothing else, as the creature soon attacks the helicopter and causes it to crash. Jake and Sherry manage to survive, but Sherry sustains grievous wounds after using herself as a human shield to protect Jake. For a mercenary, Jake's kind of a dolt because he immediately pulls out the piece of helicopter stuck in Sherry's gut after seeing it, which isn't really something you should do. However, instead of experiencing massive blood loss, Jake is surprised to see Sherry regenerate from her wound. Afterward, the duo holds up in a nearby cottage where Sherry opens up about the nature of her healing factor. Because if you remember, Sherry's dad and the inventor of the G virus, William Birkin, injected her with an embryo back in Resident Evil 2. Claire was able to prevent her from mutating with the help of a vaccine. And, well, let's just say Sherry got a pretty sweet side effect as a result: her healing factor. In true Resident Evil fashion, their shared life stories allow Jake and Sherry to build some romantic tension. However, they're soon interrupted when Neo Umbrella arrives at their location and ambushes them. Jake and Sherry are able to fend them off and eventually reach the edge of the Estonian border, only to be captured by more Neo Umbrella operatives. Jake recognizes that the same lady who donated the tainted supplements to his rebel group is also present. The duo is then taken to a Neo Umbrella base somewhere in China, where they become guinea pigs to the organization's inhumane experiments for half a year. But then one day, Jake finds an opening and seizes the opportunity to sabotage the facility. This allows our boy to make his escape. Sherry also capitalizes on the chaos and makes her own way out of this disgusting facility. Our two heroes reunite shortly after and soon make contact with Sherry's allies in the US. They find out that Sherry's boss is in China, so they make arrangements to regroup. And after battling through hordes of monsters, Jake and Sherry finally make it out of the facility. But their victory is short-lived, as the duo soon finds themselves surrounded by Neo Umbrella agents yet again. The two youngsters are just about ready to give up when Chris and a squad of BSA operatives arise to save them. The problem is, Sherry's boss told them not to make contact with anyone until they've rendezvoused, so the two are forced to flee the scene, without so much as a "thank you for saving us, Mr. Redfield." Later, Jake and Sherry spot a US government aircraft crash right in front of them. They start to investigate the scene and come across Leon Kennedy. Leon tells the duo that Sherry's boss, Derek Simmons, was the mastermind behind the outbreak. Sherry starts to have doubts about meeting up with her boss, so she comes up with a plan to link up with Leon again at their designated rendezvous point. You know, just for security. However, as they reach the rendezvous point, Sherry spots Leon and his partner, Helena, already fighting Derek. Derek then confesses to the fact that he was the one who ordered the outbreak. And of course, he did it all for America, somehow. From there, Simmons tells his goons to shut down Leon and Helena. Leon and Helena then order Jake and Sherry to flee while they deal with Derek and his henchmen. The two young heroes obey, but they end up getting captured by Neo Umbrella again. This time, the duo is sent to a Neo Umbrella base literally situated at the bottom of the sea. At this point, Jake and Sherry have pretty much lost the will to fight. Thankfully, Chris and his fellow BSAA agent, Piers Nivens, eventually rescue the duo after receiving a lead from Leon. Along the way, Chris reveals to Jake that he's the guy who took out his dad. Jake gets all aggro after hearing this, and we get a good old-fashioned standoff. It all amounts to nothing, though, because our heroes are interrupted by the arrival of another Neo Umbrella monster known as the Chaos. Chris tells Sherry and Jake to escape, considering that they really need the young merc's blood to find a cure for the C-virus, while he and Pierce get into it with the monster. Sherry and Jake do as they're told, but surprise, surprise, their escape is cut short when none other than their old nemesis Ustanok reemerges. Sherry and Jake get into a climactic battle with Ustanok and ultimately take out this relentless hunter. Sometime later, Jake finally holds up his end of the deal and provides Sherry with his blood sample. However, he has a change of heart, and instead of taking the $50 million, he charges Sherry only $50. I mean, I guess it's the right thing to do, but come on, Jake. The US government wouldn't even realize $50 million is missing, so why not take the opportunity? In any case, Jake's blood samples allows the formulation of a cure for the C-virus, which leads to the prevention of the global pandemic. And with this, Jake and Sherry's story is concluded. Chris's campaign. Chris's tale starts at a dive bar somewhere in Eastern Europe, where our favorite boulder-punching action hero has seen better days. Right now, he mostly wastes his days drinking after losing his memories in an operation in Edonia. Yeah, I know it sounds weird, but we'll get to what exactly happened here. Soon, his fellow BSAA operative Pierce interrupts his drinking and invites him to get back on the saddle and return to active duty. Chris accepts Pierce's call to action, and he soon leads his BSAA Alpha team to a mission in China to contain another viral outbreak. It's during this adventure that Chris encounters the C-virus-infected mutants known as the Javo, and after several dangerous missions, our hero and his squad eventually reaches an enemy base that also serves as a nest for these creatures. This allows the amnesiac Chris to regain a tiny part of his lost memories. For now, he only remembers one word: Finn. The story then rewinds the clock half a year, where we finally get details about what happened in Edonia. As it turns out, Chris had already come into contact with Javos during this mission, as Edonia rebel operatives have used them as their vanguard forces. After a grueling shootout, Chris and Alpha Team manage to take control of the rebels' HQ. It's here he encounters the one and only Ada Wong. As it turns out, Ada has been working for Neo Umbrella, and Chris also finds out about the C-virus. So Chris and Alpha Team pick up Ada, only for her to infect everyone in his team with the C-virus. Chris remains uninfected, but his entire squad soon emerges from their respective cocoons as grotesque beasts. He fends them off, but our hero gets hit in the head in the process, which explains his amnesia. All we know is that Pierce was the one who pulled him out of the battlefield at the end of that encounter. In the present, Chris regains a few more details about his missing memories, that Ada was the one who wiped out his squad and how she's a Neo Umbrella agent. Chris also recalls that Ada was the one who started the outbreak in China. This makes Chris red with rage, and he swears to get revenge against her. So Chris goes on a manhunt for Ada and eventually meets Sherry and Jake for the first time. It's at this point that Chris remembers that he had fought alongside Jake during the Edonia mission half a year ago. Chris, Sherry, and Jake go their separate ways shortly after. As our hero continues to hunt down Ada, Alpha Team accrues several casualties along the way, but Chris eventually arrives at a Neo Umbrella facility where he thinks Ada has holed up. Instead of finding Ada all by herself though, Chris instead comes across Leon as well. He gets Leon up to speed with what Ada had done in Edonia. However, Leon refuses to believe him. They get into a macho standoff which allows Ada to escape. Cooler heads prevail as Leon and Chris patch things up after realizing how stupid they're behaving. In the end, Leon pretty much tells Chris he's got to do what he's got to do, so he lets him continue his hunt for Ada. Chris, along with Pierce, soon finds themselves aboard a Neo Umbrella-occupied aircraft to confront Ada once again. Right now, Ada's preparing to drop a virus-loaded missile on China to plunge the world into chaos. However, before that can happen, Ada gets shot by a mysterious person from a nearby helicopter. Although Ada dies, everyone soon learns that she had already triggered the missile's launch system to make sure it drops on China. The missiles go off, and the city below becomes a zombie-infested hellhole almost instantly. Chris receives a call from Leon shortly after, who asks for his help in saving Jake and Sherry from Neo Umbrella's deep-sea facility. This ties right into the events of Jake's tale. In any case, the rescue goes as planned, and as you guys know by now, Chris and Pierce are forced to battle Hayos. However, this battle doesn't go as planned, as Pierce catches a life-threatening wound during the fight. Knowing he's going to die anyway, Pierce takes one for the team and self-administers a dose of the sea virus. He then mutates into a monster that's strong enough to subdue Hayos. Not only that, but Pierce proves that he's ride or die when he hauls Chris aboard the facility's escape pod and sends him off. Pierce and Hayos meet their end when the facility ultimately collapses, and in the aftermath, Chris honors Pierce's memory by continuing to fight the good fight, Leon's campaign. Next up is Leon's dedicated Resident Evil 6 campaign, which starts in June of 2013. US President Adam Benford prepares to make a speech at Ivy University in the city of Tall Oaks, where he plans on publicly condemning the US government's involvement in the destruction of Raccoon City. This doesn't come to pass though, as terrorists arrive on the scene to release sea virus vapor on campus, which mutates scores upon scores of innocent civilians. Leon, who we find out is also working for the DSO, springs into action to save the president. However, he's too late. Benford has already succumbed to the virus and transformed into an undead monster. In fact, Zombie Benford is just about ready to chow down on one of his own Secret Service operatives, Helena Harper. This particular sequence is also the first time Leon meets Helena as he rescues her from Zombie Benford. Helena and Leon soon band together to pursue the terrorist, which leads them to a nearby cathedral. There, our heroes discover an underground laboratory housing a horde of Javo cocoons. But what blows Leon's mind is when he finds footage of his former lover Ada emerging from one of these husks. Leon and Helena continue their investigation and soon come across Helena's own sister, Deborah, deep within the laboratory. The sibling reunion takes a dark turn when Deborah suddenly transforms into a grotesque cocoon and reemerges as a mutated monster. Our heroes are then forced to defend themselves against her. To Leon's surprise, Ada suddenly arrives on the scene to help them. Helena ultimately puts Deborah out of her misery and reveals a secret she's been keeping from Leon this whole time. It turns out that the mastermind behind this attack is none other than Derek Simmons. Yep, this is how Leon finds out about it. Anyway, Helena reveals that Derek actually blackmailed her into helping him take out Benford after he abducted Deborah. Ada breaks away from the duo, and our heroes soon give their handler, Ingrid Hunnigan, a call. But instead of reaching Ingrid, Derek is the one on the other end of the line. We find out that Derek has framed both Leon and Helena for Benford's murder. He offers our heroes a deal. He'll drop the accusations if they come to his side. Leon and Helena refuse, of course, and instead swear to get vengeance against this scumbag. They soon make their way above ground, only to be met by more bad news, that the entire city of Tall Oaks has been leveled by a missile strike similar to the one that happened in Raccoon City. Meanwhile, Derek travels to China to wreak more havoc. Ingrid helps our heroes fabricate their own deaths to shake off the authorities while they pursue Derek. Leon and Helena soon arrive in China, only to discover that there's already a full-blown outbreak going on. It's here where Leon meets Sherry and Jake. Leon and Helena then split up from them to travel to Derek's location. They come across Ada again, and it's at this point where Leon and Chris get into their ridiculous standoff. Long story short, the two boys become bros again, and Leon and Helena make their way to Derek's location shortly after. A fight immediately begins the moment they spot Derek. It reaches its climax when Derek is infected with the C virus and promptly turns into a monster. However, Leon and Helena are able to defeat him. And just when they thought this whole mess was over, the duo receives a call from Chris telling them to flee the area as soon as possible because Ada's zombie missile is about to drop. This info came a bit too late though, and our heroes can only watch on as the entire city becomes a hellish zombie feeding ground. Leon and Helena are thankfully uninfected. Leon and Helena then get their saving grace when a helicopter arrives to extract our heroes. What's weird is that the one piloting this aircraft is none other than Ada, who had already died during their confrontation with Chris aboard the Neo Umbrella missile aircraft. Don't worry, we'll get to how this is possible real soon. In any case, Leon and Helena board the helicopter and make their way to the quad tower where a big surprise is waiting for them. It's Derek, who's still alive, thanks to his C virus mutation. So one final bout between our heroes along with Ada and a mutated Derek ensues. And finally, Derek is permanently destroyed. Leon and Helena turn their heads for a second before boarding the helicopter again, only to discover that Ada has vanished like Batman. Leon shrugs it off for now, and the duo makes their escape. Ada's campaign. And so, we arrive at the last of the 4 storylines in Resident Evil 6, the one that focuses on Ada Wong herself. Ada's story starts when she receives a message from Derek, who at the time is still working as Benford's presidential aide. Derek entices her with some information that would prove valuable to her. The only thing Ada needs to do is sneak into a submarine, and all will be revealed. Ada takes the bait, and soon reaches the submarine. However, she gets weirded out when she notices that she can easily get past its security systems because her fingerprint is registered with the submarine. Ultimately, Ada gets her so-called prize, a mission from Derek telling her to get her hands on Jake Muller. What's more curious is that this mission had already been given to her half a year ago, but Ada doesn't remember one bit of it at all. Ada soon makes her exit and gets another call from Derek, telling her that the same orders she found in the submarine are a part of the bigger picture. Derek also informs Ada about Neo Umbrella's latest plans, that they're going to strike the US and then China after that. So Ada makes her way to the States, where the attack at Ivy University and Tall Oaks soon transpires and leads to the president's demise. Ada then travels to Derek's facility, where she comes across Leon and Helena, just as it happened in Leon's storyline. It's here we find out that Derek's actions at Tall Oaks ultimately granted him some much-wanted clout in the family. Ada then breaks away from Leon and Helena to do some investigating of her own inside the facility. Our heroine gets extra weirded out when she watches the same footage that Leon saw during his campaign, the one where we see Ada emerging from a cocoon. She quickly connects the dots and realizes that the reason she doesn't remember Derek's orders from half a year ago is because she wasn't the one who received them. It was this mysterious Ada clone. Of course, our heroine isn't going to let a poor imitation ruin her brand, especially since this clone aligned itself with Neo Umbrella. So, our girl gets to work hunting down her doppelganger. Her quest soon leads her to China, just as the Neo Umbrella outbreak is heating up. From there, she uses her espionage skills to learn her doppelganger's location. Soon enough, Ada reaches the same zombie missile-carrying aircraft that her doppelganger has boarded. After a bit of investigating, Ada learns the origin behind her copycat. It turns out that it was Derek who spearheaded the creation of this clone for the purpose of having a super spy that would be loyal to him and him alone. To create fake Ada, Derek nabbed a scientist working for the family named Carla Radames and injected her with the C virus, which ultimately mutated Carla into Ada's clone. Carla was then brainwashed into believing she was the real Ada and that she had no other choice but to obey Derek. On a side note, let's just say that Derek is one creepy son of a gun. The man pretty much has an obsession with Ada, which is why he went through all this trouble. Anyway, Carla's own consciousness eventually emerges, and she became understandably furious about what Derek did to her. We also learn at this point that Carla was the one who established Neo Umbrella in the first place. You see, at some point in the past, Carla outshined Derek by earning the family's trust and the power that came with it. But back to our story. The real Ada finally encounters her doppelganger, Carla, aboard the aircraft. So, remember how this so-called Ada was shot by an unknown sniper during Chris's storyline? Well, it turns out that it was the family who ordered a hit on her after they realized that both Carla and Derek were just too much trouble for them. In any case, Ada believes that Carla's dead, and that's that. But then Carla is suddenly resurrected thanks to the C virus flowing in her veins. She then transforms into a monster, and at this point, Carla's own consciousness has been overridden. She now thinks she's the OG Ada Wong. So, real Ada and Carla get into a scuffle. Our heroine gets the best of the mutated monster before boarding a helicopter to deal with Derek. You already know what happens next based on Leon's campaign. Ada soon reaches Leon and Helena, and they band together to knock out a mutated Derek. Ada then goes snooping around until she gets her hands on a confidential file containing details about herself and her doppelganger. Our heroine purges this sensitive information from the records. And if you guys recall, Ada suddenly disappeared after their bout with Derek, leaving Leon and Helena to escape using her helicopter. That's because our heroine decided to do some more digging in the area. She eventually discovers Carla's old research data, but her biggest find is a lone cocoon hidden inside the same building. So, just to make sure this whole mess won't happen again, especially to her, Ada destroys all of Carla's research materials and kills the cocoon with good old-fashioned fire. Ada's storyline ends when she receives another mission from her employers. Resident Evil 7. Now we arrive at what you might call the modern titles in the Resident Evil series. Capcom basically went back to the franchise's roots with the release of this game. For one, this title does away with the whole action shooter tropes that began with Resident Evil 4, instead opting to return to a survival horror format that the series has been renowned for. Also, Resident Evil 7 introduces us to an entirely new main character in the form of Ethan Winters. However, before we get to him and the main storyline of this game, we need to cover one of the DLCs first. Resident Evil 7 Daughters, 2014. This DLC opens with a girl named Zoe Barker, who watches news about the oncoming dissipation of a devastating hurricane that recently ravaged the state of Louisiana. There's also a report about a missing ship on the news named the SS Annabelle. We then find out that one of the SS Annabelle survivors, a woman named Mia Winters, was saved by Zoe's family. Later, Jack, Zoe's father, brings home a young girl named Evelyn, who he found near the wreckage of a destroyed tanker. It's here where we also meet Zoe's mother, Marguerite, who tells Jack that Mia is still sleeping. Jack decides to allow their visitors to stay in their house until they're healthy enough to go to town. So Marguerite offers Evelyn to stay in Lucas' room, Zoe's older brother. Everything seems fine until Marguerite tells Zoe to hand Evelyn some fresh clothes. She does so, but it gets instantly creepy when Evelyn tells Zoe that they're all hers now, clearly not just referring to the clothes. Electricity at the Baker household suddenly goes out after a lightning strike. Evelyn goes out of Jack's room, prompting Zoe to look for her. Instead, she spots her brother, who seems to have passed out. Things quickly escalate when Zoe hears her mom in the bathroom. The girl arrives to see Marguerite acting strange before telling her daughter that Evelyn gave her a quote-unquote gift. And right then and there, Marguerite violently grabs Zoe and a horde of insects shoots out of her mouth. Jack arrives in time to save Zoe, who gets some rope to subdue Marguerite. So, crisis averted, right? Nope. Because the next thing Zoe witnesses is Jack trying to drown Marguerite inside their bathroom. Jack then suddenly stabs himself as a sort of weird tribute to Evelyn. Zoe tries to escape their house, while her dad grabs Lucas to bring him to Evelyn and receive the girl's freaky blessing. Zoe hides from her mom in their living room, and this whole sequence reveals that Evelyn has literally burrowed into Marguerite and Jack's mind. Now, there are two endings to this story. Canonically speaking, Zoe finds a letter that their other guest, Mia, left for them. In it, Mia thanks the Bakers for rescuing her from the SS Annabelle. But the main point of her letter is when she tells the Bakers to keep an eye out for Evelyn. On the bright side, the letter also states that there's a possible serum they can create to cure Zoe's family of Evelyn's infection. However, before Zoe can try to help her family, Evelyn suddenly appears out of nowhere and everything goes black. Fast forward to the morning after, and Zoe regains consciousness in front of their dinner table. Things look ordinary, so the girl presumes that everything that had happened until now was just a bad dream. That is, until Evelyn suddenly appears with them and greets Zoe, calling her sister. Resident Evil 7, banned footage, 2017. 3 years later, in June 2017, the production crew for a web show called Sewer Gators, made up of Clancy, Andre, and Peter, makes the mistake of paying the Baker house a visit to film their goofy show. Unsurprisingly enough, Jack abducts the entire crew. Clancy soon wakes up to find out that his colleagues have already been murdered, so he does the only thing he can, try to find a way out of this hell swamp. Clancy attempts to make his escape, but is soon nabbed by Marguerite, who holds him hostage inside the Baker household's master bedroom. Marguerite tries to infect him, but he once again manages to escape. This time, he finds himself inside a tunnel underneath the Baker family abode. Well, too bad for this dude, because Clancy is next accosted by Lucas, who takes him to a room in order to participate in a little game. Curiously, there's another guy with a sack over his head in the same room as Clancy, someone who Lucas simply calls Hoffman. Lucas forces his two captives to play a sick game that involves cards and a lot of pain. Hoffman soon dies as a result of the game, which prompts Lucas to use him as a meat puppet to toy with Clancy some more. They play another deadly game that Lucas thinks Clancy would surely lose, but surprisingly, he ends up winning. So how does the story end? Well, let's just say that Lucas is a sore loser and Clancy never makes it out of the Baker house alive. But we only learn about Clancy's ultimate fate in Resident Evil 7's main storyline as a minor detail. In this particular DLC, Clancy's story concludes with Lucas challenging him to yet another sick game. Resident Evil 7 main storyline, 2017. At the beginning of this game, we meet Ethan Winters, an unassuming engineer who happens to be Mia's husband. In case you forgot, Mia is the woman who warned Zoe about Evelyn back in the Daughters DLC. At this point, Mia has been gone since 2014, and Ethan has more or less accepted that she is really gone. But then, one day, our hero receives a mysterious email claiming to be from his long-lost wife, who tells him to head over to a plantation in Louisiana to get her. Ethan heeds the email and soon arrives at a dilapidated house, where he finds Mia trapped inside the basement. Ethan saves her, and the couple makes their way out of the creepy house. But things get dicey when Mia suddenly lashes out and starts attacking her husband. Ethan defends himself, which leads to Mia's death. Ethan then receives a call from Zoe, who offers to help him. And as soon as their short chat ends, Mia mysteriously resurrects and goes after Ethan again. This time, she cuts off one of his hands. And if that's not bad enough, Jack suddenly appears out of nowhere and incapacitates our guy. Jack takes Ethan to the Baker household afterwards, where our hero finally meets Zoe, who literally stitches his missing hand back to his arm. However, he's not there as a guest. Ethan's now a hostage to the Baker family. Weirdly enough, the Baker family has one peculiar addition to their ranks that wasn't present before: an old lady in a wheelchair. Ethan attempts to make his escape from the house, but Jack keeps trying to stop him. What's more is that our hero witnesses firsthand that Jack has the ability to heal and regenerate from physical injury, ranging from minor cuts to being literally shot in the face. Later, Zoe reaches out to Ethan again. She gives him the lowdown on what Evelyn did to her family, and most importantly, informs Ethan about the same cure that Mia told her about in the letter. So, Ethan goes on a fetch quest to gather the components for the cure. And hey, he even manages to take out Marguerite and Jack in the process. He ultimately gets all the ingredients they need for the cure, but more trouble comes when Ethan starts having weird hallucinations of a strange little girl. Wonder who that could be. In any case, things get worse when Lucas gets his hands on both Mia and Zoe. In turn, Ethan is forced to rescue the two by going into the Baker family's barn. And shortly after, Zoe is able to formulate the cure. There are a couple of doses, enough for both her and Mia. The action ramps back up when Jack reappears and gets into it with Ethan again. So Ethan is forced to use one dose of the cure to defeat the crazy old man, which leaves him with a difficult choice: administer the last dose to Mia or Zoe. Now, Resident Evil has two branching paths here, but the canonical story is that Ethan uses the final dose on Mia. I mean, he is pretty much choosing between a random girl and his wife. So yeah, I'm not really sure why this choice even exists. Anyway, Zoe has no choice but to curse her fate. After all, she did a lot of legwork here and got none of the compensation. Ethan promises Zoe that he's going to send her some help just before they split up. Ethan and Mia then make their escape on a boat and speed through the river, only for a gruesome swamp monster to ambush them. Sometime later, Mia reemerges from the boat's wreckage and starts looking for her husband. She still suffers from hallucinations of Eveline in spite of being cured of the infection, with the creepy girl calling Mia her mom. And it's here we get the big reveal that Mia isn't your typical housewife. In truth, she's actually a secret agent working for a certain organization. It's this same organization that created Eveline, who's actually a powerful bioweapon. Mia recalls that she and a fellow agent were supposed to bring Eveline to the same tanker where Jack first found her. However, Eveline managed to escape. From there, Eveline proceeded to infect Mia with her freaky ability and made her act like she was the girl's mom. Back in the present, Mia eventually locates her husband and hands him a sample of Eveline's DNA. But at this point, Eveline has nearly taken hold of Mia's mind and body. In the end, Mia digs deep and allows Ethan to escape the tanker while trapping herself inside it. Later, Ethan comes across a secret facility hidden within an old mine. It's here he learns more about Eveline's origins, particularly that the girl is a bioweapon who has the ability to infect her targets with a psychoactive mold. Once she does, Eveline is able to seize control of their psyches, which drives them crazy. It's this same mold that gives Eveline's unfortunate targets the ability to regenerate from their injuries and cause grotesque transformations. Now, Eveline, in spite of being a devastating weapon, was raised in an environment that made her pine for a family of her own. This explains why she did what she did to Mia and the Baker family, and why she tricked Ethan into coming to Louisiana. And just to clarify, it was Eveline who actually sent the email through Mia. Another interesting thing we find out during this time is that Lucas wasn't even infected. He was actually immunized by the same company that Mia worked for as part of a deal where his job is to relay observations about Eveline to them. With the exposition dump out of the way, Ethan proceeds to tinker with the facility's equipment and Eveline's DNA sample to craft a toxin that would finally kill her. He then goes back to the Baker household for one climactic clash with Eveline. Ethan ultimately wins their scuffle when he injects her with his anti-Eveline toxin. Oh, and as for that creepy old lady in a wheelchair from earlier, yeah, it turns out that this hag is actually Eveline. In classic Resident Evil fashion, Eveline starts transforming into a huge monster. Thankfully, a squad of BSAA operatives led by none other than Chris Redfield arrives just in time to help Ethan out. With Eveline out of the picture, Chris takes Ethan aboard their helicopter and whisks him away from this nightmare. And even better, Mia is revealed to still be alive, as Ethan finds her on that same aircraft. Here's where things get twisty, however. Resident Evil 7's main story closes with a shot of the helicopter which brandishes Umbrella's symbol, implying that Chris, the same man who once swore he'd bring down this company, is now working for them. Or is he? Well, that mystery is answered in another of Resident Evil 7's DLC storylines called Not a Hero. This one opens shortly after the conclusion of the main story, as we learn that Chris is still with the BSAA, who has been coordinating with a resurrected and repurposed Umbrella Corporation. These days, Umbrella goes by a new name, Blue Umbrella. Now, Blue Umbrella was founded in 2007 as a reformed version of the original company. Its mission statement allegedly says that it aims to correct all the wrongdoings that the original Umbrella did in the past. As such, they've shifted their focus from creating bioweapons to fighting them. However, the world has already learned its lessons from the OG Umbrella, so they place a specific rule that forbids Blue Umbrella from forming its own paramilitary army like they had before. Instead, Blue Umbrella works with other anti-bioweapon companies such as the BSAA. Back to our story. Chris goes on a mission to take Lucas Baker into custody after eluding capture during the events of the main game. On top of that, our hero is also tasked with looking into the same organization that created Eveline, a shady group known only as the Connections. Soon, Chris and his squad reach the facility in the mine, the same one where Ethan created his anti-Eveline toxin. As it turns out, Lucas owns this place. Instead of finding the crazy hillbilly, though, our hero falls for one of Lucas' traps, which forcibly attaches an explosive to Chris' wrist. Regardless, Chris and his team continue their journey and suffer casualties from more of Lucas' booby traps. Along the way, Lucas tries to take Chris out by activating his wrist explosives timer, but our hero manages to free himself with the help of some liquid nitrogen. With only the mission to worry about, Chris powers through more of Lucas' traps until he reaches another hidden laboratory owned by the Connections. We then find out that Lucas has already taken out each and every employee working here. As it turns out, the guy has screwed over his former contacts at the Connections to work with an entirely different company. Lucas then starts sending over the facility's findings to this unnamed group. We don't get any more details about that, because Chris ends up putting a bullet in Lucas shortly after. But this is Resident Evil we're talking about, so of course Lucas resurrects and mutates into a monster. A climactic battle between Chris and Lucas erupts. Chris wins and prevents Lucas from transferring the research data. The story ends with Chris going back to Blue Umbrella HQ after a long day at the office. Resident Evil 7, End of Zoe. Now, the last storyline from Resident Evil 7 I'm going to talk about is called End of Zoe, which picks up right after Zoe is separated from Ethan and Mia. That said, Zoe seemingly falls at Evelyn's hands after Ethan and Mia leave her. But it's revealed in this DLC that she ultimately survived the ordeal and was rescued by a couple of Blue Umbrella operatives. The operatives are then ambushed by Joe, Zoe's uncle. Unlike the main Baker family, Evelyn hasn't infected Joe with the virus. The only reason he attacked the Blue Umbrella operatives was because he thought they were the ones who infected her. However, one of the operatives clears things up and tells Joe that there's a cure for Zoe at a shack nearby. Joe returns to them only to discover that the Blue Umbrella agent has been taken out by one of the mold monsters lurking in the area. So, Joe takes it upon himself to help his niece. They try to look for Blue Umbrella HQ to grab a cure for Zoe, but a powerful mold monster known as the Swamp Man gives them chase. Even worse, Joe and Zoe do reach Blue Umbrella HQ only to find out that it's already been deserted. On the bright side, they also discover that the cure for Zoe can be found on a boat not too far away. Joe reaches it and manages to fend off the Swamp Man in the process. Even better, he finds the cure they've been searching for this whole time. The problem is, Zoe is abducted by the Swamp Man before Joe could administer it, so Joe pursues them until he catches up to Zoe at a broken-down church. However, the Swamp Man gets the jump on our hero and we get the big reveal that this monster is actually Jack, who managed to survive his final duel with Ethan. Jack knocks out Joe and leaves him to drown in the swamp. Later, Joe reawakens to find himself washed ashore near the Baker family house. He witnesses Blue Umbrella operatives in a heated confrontation against more of the mold monsters. In the middle of the confusion, Joe is able to steal a Blue Umbrella weapon known as a power gauntlet before heading inside the Baker house. There, Joe goes full action hero and puts an end to Jack. He finally gives Zoe the cure, which finally removes her infection. It's also at this moment when Chris and his squad arrives to extract the two. Zoe's story closes when Ethan gives her a call, and she thanks the man for staying true to his word, that he'd go look for help after they got separated. So everything worked out for everyone. Well, maybe except for Evelyn and most of the Bakers. Resident Evil Village 2021. RE Village serves as a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7 and features Ethan Winters as its main protagonist once again. But from the slimy, moldy bayous of Louisiana, this title primarily takes place at a village somewhere in Eastern Europe. If you've stuck around since the beginning of the video, then you probably remember me mentioning how there was a castle built in the region sometime in the 15th century. Well, that little piece of information is finally going to play a role here. Resident Evil Village's story begins a few years after the conclusion of Ethan and Maya's story at the Baker house. It's February of 2021, and we find out that the Winters couple has since immigrated from the United States to live in Eastern Europe at the recommendation and expense of the BSAA. Given the sensitive information they know from Resident Evil 7, Ethan and Mia have also been placed under the BSAA's protection this whole time. In the intervening period, Ethan decided to beef up and undergo military training courses. The biggest development that happened between the end of RE7 and Village is that Ethan and Mia now have a daughter named Rosemary. We also learned that the whole mess in Louisiana was covered up by authorities to prevent public outcry, portraying it as a tragic gas leak that took out most of its residents. Regardless, our story opens at the Winters household where Mia reads her daughter, Rose, a bedtime story until she falls asleep. Ethan carries the kid to her bedroom and the couple has dinner afterwards. Nothing out of the ordinary happens, except for the fact that it's clear both Ethan and Mia were left with some lingering psychological scars from their time at the Baker house. They almost get into an argument when Ethan brings up Louisiana, but this quickly turns into an absolute tragedy when someone suddenly shoots Mia in the shoulder. The Winters assailants are soon revealed to be none other than Chris Redfield and his squad of BSAA agents. Big twist aside, Chris walks toward Mia and finishes the job, while Ethan watches in horror. Without saying anything else, Chris then tells his squad to secure both Ethan and Rose. Our guy tries to fight back, but it's no use, and he quickly gets knocked out. Just as Ethan loses consciousness, he remembers a past argument that he and Mia had about Rose, about how there's something that makes her different from other kids. Soon, Ethan wakes up to find out that the convoy that's supposed to transport him has been flipped over. Plus, all the BSAA operatives who were escorting him have been killed. But worst of all, Rose is nowhere to be found. Ethan then hears a phone ringing nearby. He answers it and forces the other person on the line to tell him where his daughter and Chris are. But they don't give him anything. The call ends, and Ethan starts to follow a trail of blood, eventually reaching the village. Ethan soon meets one of its inhabitants, Grigory, who asks our hero at gunpoint why he's in their village. Ethan tries to answer, but they're suddenly ambushed by a pack of werewolves, which in Resident Evil universe are called Lycans. Grigory realizes that defending themselves is more important than interrogating each other, so he hands Ethan a firearm to fight off the Lycans. And yeah, it doesn't work. Grigory gets instantly mauled, while Ethan is abducted by another one of these wolfmen and taken to a basement filled with the lifeless bodies of the other villagers. Another Lycan tries to attack our guy, but Ethan manages to take it out. He loses a couple of fingers in the process though. Afterwards, Ethan hears a radio transmission where a voice urges the village's surviving inhabitants to head over to the house of a woman named Louisa. Ethan tries to make his way to this place, but he almost instantly stops when a pack of Lycans appears and prepares to ravage him. Curiously though, these monsters suddenly fall back when they hear the ringing of the local castle's bells. Shortly after, Ethan encounters an old lady who asks him if he's the father of the child. Realizing that she's referring to Rose, Ethan says yes, and the old crone tells him that the kid was taken to this place by the god of their village, Mother Miranda, who is the person responsible for all the chaos happening in the village. Afterwards, Ethan makes his way to Louisa's house. There, he meets a couple of other survivors named Elena and Leonardo. They soon enter the place and are welcomed by Louisa herself. Inside, our hero meets a few more survivors, such as Anton, Roxana, and Sebastian. Anton isn't too happy that there's an outsider in Louisa's safe haven, referring to Ethan, but the lady of the house remains firm in her choice to let our guy stay. Ethan asks her what's up with this murderous village, and Louisa tells him that this community used to be a peaceful one, until these wolfmen showed up one day all of a sudden. The villagers inside the house each have their own concerns, and in the end, all they can do is pray to their god, Mother Miranda. Ethan gets weirded out and recalls the old crone from earlier, someone who Leonardo says is just a crazy old lady, nothing more. The peace doesn't last long as Leonardo soon lashes out and kills Louisa with a machete before setting the whole place on fire. Ethan tells Elena to run for her life as he notices the man transform into a Lycan before goring all the other survivors. Ethan almost gets another mauling when Elena shoots Leo with a shotgun. The two run to the garage and Ethan is able to hotwire Louisa's old truck to make their escape. However, he crashes it, so they're forced to head to the house's attic to look for a different exit route. Leo closes in on them, and despite Ethan's warning not to do so, Elena rushes toward Leo, which ultimately leads to her demise. Our hero, on the other hand, manages to escape through a window. To Ethan's shock, he spots none other than the village deity, Mother Miranda, murdering a man. He tries to follow her, but ultimately links up with the old crone from before. Shortly after, Ethan finally goes to the local castle in hopes of finding his daughter. Inside, it doesn't take long before Ethan falls flat on his face again when he's taken by a man with the peculiar ability to control electromagnetic fields. The man then takes him to Miranda, and it's here we get acquainted with the other high-ranking members of the village. First, there's Lady Alcina Dimitrescu, a pale, tall, vampiric lady. Lady Dimitrescu is the head of the castle bearing her family name. Then there's Donna Beneviento, who exclusively uses her doll named Angie whenever she needs to make a public appearance. In truth, the real Donna Beneviento is a shut-in, living in her family manor. Next is Salvatore Moreau. Aside from being crazy ugly, he also suffers from severe self-esteem issues. Oh, and he's a fishman who eats people. Finally, there's Karl Heisenberg, the same man who caught him inside the castle. Now, I wouldn't give too much away just yet, So all you should know for now is that Heisenberg has his own factory where he conducts gruesome experiments. In the middle of this sit-down, Lady Dimitrescu and Heisenberg get into a disagreement over what to do with Ethan. Heisenberg proposes they just use him as a human sacrifice for Miranda, but Lady Dimitrescu prefers to play with him instead, which, if you ask me, sounds like a good time. Too bad for Ethan though, because Miranda gets the final word and gives Ethan to Heisenberg. In turn, Heisenberg forces Ethan to play a sick game where he has to survive while being chased down by lichens. Ethan survives the ordeal and soon finds himself at Castle Dimitrescu. It's here he meets a classy salesman known only as the Duke. The Duke might seem shady, but he's actually the closest thing Ethan has to any ally in this story, as he provides our hero with some much-needed supplies. After stocking up, Ethan makes his way inside the castle only to become hostage to Lady Dimitrescu's daughters, Bella, Cassandra, and Daniela. The Dimitrescu sisters then take Ethan to their mom, who gives them the order to subdue him in hooks while she gives Mother Miranda a call. The girls do so and leave Ethan right after. He seizes this opportunity to make an escape, and after a bloody struggle, Ethan frees himself from captivity and proceeds to look for his daughter once more. He meets the Duke once again, who not only sells him some wares this time, but also gives him valuable information about Rose. According to the Duke, Rosemary is currently being held inside Lady Dimitrescu's private chambers. Exploring the castle, Ethan learns more details about this freaky stronghold, like how the Dimitrescu family distills human blood and turns it into wine. On the bright side, Ethan manages to take out Bella when they get into a scuffle. Ethan eventually reaches Lady Dimitrescu's room, where he eavesdrops on her speaking with Miranda over the phone. Our hero tries to lift the key to her private chambers, but the vampire catches him and he becomes a prisoner yet again. Ethan is sent to the castle's dungeon. As always, our guy finds a way out and even manages to take out the other two remaining Dimitrescu girls, Cassandra and Daniela. Along the way, Ethan is able to acquire an artifact known as the Dagger of Death's Flowers, a blade laced with lethal poison. He uses it against Lady Dimitrescu when they encounter each other once more. But instead of killing her, she mutates into a literal dragon. A fight ensues between Ethan and Dragon Dimitrescu, and our hero emerges victorious. Before leaving the castle, Ethan picks up a flask made of glass containing a strange artifact inside it. He then makes his way to a cave where he comes across the old crone yet again. And at this point, our hero has had enough of these weirdos in this freaky village. So he straight up demands the woman tell him where Rose is. The old crone tells our hero that his kid is going to become Miranda's sacrifice, along with the cryptic clue that the way to find Rose includes the crest of each of the village's 4 lords. Ethan soon reunites with the Duke, who gives him the bad news. It turns out that the flask he took after defeating Lady Dimitrescu contains the literal head of his daughter. But here's the thing, the kid isn't really dead. Remember how Ethan had a flashback about Rose not being an ordinary kid? Well, this is it. You see, Rose has special superpowers, and according to the Duke, her abilities allow her to retain her essence even if her physical body dies. The long and short of it is that Ethan still has a chance to bring his daughter back to life. Ethan first takes a trip to Donna's domain, House Beneviento, but our hero immediately falls for Donna's trap even before he could enter, as Ethan goes on a crappy spirit quest courtesy of the herbs planted just outside the house. Our hero soldiers on through the bad trip as he contends with various hallucinations, ranging from monstrous visions of Rose to Donna's creepy doll Angie. Ethan eventually comes face to face with Donna herself. They get into a duel where Donna uses her puppets to try and murder Ethan. As always, Ethan uses his high pain tolerance to eventually beat the second lord of the village and retrieve another flask containing a fragment of his daughter. Next, Ethan pays Salvatore a visit at the Moreau Reservoir, his family's domain. It's basically a dead swampland with a mutant fish living in its waters. Unlike the previous lords, Ethan is able to take the third rosemary flask from Salvatore without going through a grueling duel first. And fair play to Salvatore too, because he doesn't so much start a fight with Ethan when he finds out our hero has stolen the flask. He just politely begs him to give it back. Of course, Ethan is having none of it, so Salvatore tries to trap him in his domain instead. But our hero soon escapes Moreau Reservoir nonetheless. The problem is, one of Chris' squad members named Night Owl ambushes Ethan shortly after leaving the reservoir. Chris then emerges, which enrages Ethan. He berates Chris for what he did to Mia, but their meeting is cut short when Night Owl tells them they should keep moving before Miranda pings their location. Ethan desperately demands an answer from Chris for why he took out Mia, but he gets nothing. On the other hand, it's here we learn that the creepy creatures in this village can trace their origins to the same mold that Eveline was using during the events of Resident Evil 7. Ethan, Chris, and Night Owl are then forced to go their separate ways when the monstrous fish living in the reservoir suddenly ambushes them. Our hero soon reemerges at a dock where Moreau is standing, who then informs him that the way out of this reservoir can be found underwater. On top of that, he tells Ethan that Miranda is almost done with her preparations to sacrifice Rose. Moreau then takes a swim, and we find out that he and the monster fish living in the waters of the reservoir are one and the same. So another boss fight is in order. Ethan, of course, wins after he drains the reservoir and finishes Moreau off. With 3 of the 4 flasks in his possession, Ethan heads over to Heisenberg's factory to grab the final one. He soon gets into it with a powerful Lycan named Urias, and eventually gets his hands on the final flask. Afterwards, Heisenberg emerges, and he tells our hero to place all the flasks on an altar that would open the door to his factory. Ethan does so, and gains access to Heisenberg's domain, where they have a bit of a chat. Heisenberg reveals that everything Ethan has gone through in this spooky village is all part of Miranda's initiation rites to see if our hero could become part of her so-called family. On top of that, Heisenberg reveals that Miranda's actually scared of Rose's abilities, which explains why she's so dead set on using the child as a sacrifice. What's more interesting is that Heisenberg isn't really loyal to Miranda. In fact, the whole reason he's been doing experiments at his factory is to create his own army to take her down. So Heisenberg proposes teaming up with Ethan to rescue his daughter and use Rose's abilities to take Miranda down. Ethan rejects the offer, so Heisenberg drops him down into the factory where our hero is forced to battle through hordes of grotesque human-machine hybrids. He ultimately survives the gauntlet and makes his way back to the top of the factory, only to encounter Heisenberg once more. Heisenberg then mutates into a big boss-type monster and shoves him back to the bottom of the factory. There, he ends up meeting Chris again, who is currently preparing to sabotage the entire place with bombs. It's here that Chris finally reveals his motives for taking out Mia at the start of the story. As he puts it, he didn't kill the real Mia. It was actually Miranda in disguise, because this freaky cult leader has the power to shapeshift. In truth, he's not a god, he's just another bioweapon. Because if you guys recall, Miranda actually came into contact with a potent fungus known as the Black God, all the way back in 1919. Chris goes on to reveal that Miranda's fungal infection turned her insane. And this whole village is actually her personal experimentation ground with the Black God mold. Things get extra complicated because Miranda now has the flasks after Ethan left them at the altar earlier. Now, Chris might have been acting like a bit of a jerk this whole game, but he's still a good guy. So he presents Ethan with a literal tank he can use to fight Heisenberg. And if you need more proof that Chris is still one of the good guys, he swears he and Ethan are going to get Rose back. Ready to rumble, Ethan rides his war machine back to the top of the factory to tussle with Heisenberg. Long story short, Ethan ultimately blasts Heisenberg to hell. And along the way, Chris manages to detonate the explosives he planted all around the factory, completely destroying it. Afterwards, Chris gives Ethan a call and the two decide to regroup. However, Miranda catches up to our hero before they can do so. More revelations come to light as Miranda tells Ethan that Rose isn't just a superpowered child. She actually happens to be Eveline's final form. Aside from Rose's power, Miranda wants to get her hands on the kid, thinking that she's going to be resurrected as her own long-dead daughter, Eva, after she's done with her ritual. Ethan also learns that the old crone he had been encountering throughout the village happens to be another one of Miranda's alternate forms. All of a sudden, Miranda lunges at Ethan and easily rips out his heart, seemingly killing him. Meanwhile, Chris receives word from the rest of his squad that Ethan has fallen. He partly blames himself for this whole mess, believing that he and his team should have made sure they 100% killed Miranda back when she was still pretending to be Mia. Knowing he owes Ethan for this blunder, Chris orders his squad to mount an all-out offensive against Miranda. At the same time, Chris's team notices that BSAA operatives have also arrived on the scene. But they have no time to dig into this because they have to go deal with Miranda and rescue Ethan's daughter. Instead, Chris sends one of his trusted squad mates, K9, to investigate the BSAA's motives, while the rest of them proceeds with their original mission. They soon reach the village and discover that Miranda has cut off the site of her ritual with a barrier. However, this doesn't stop our heroes from doing their job as they ambush the monsters in the village in a coordinated attack. The ensuing encounter inadvertently blows a hole in the ground, which Chris enters. Our hero travels through this underground cavern until he reaches the source of Miranda's powers and the dreadful infection that has been plaguing the village, the black god fungus root. So Chris rigs it with explosives, but he doesn't blow it up just yet, because first he has to get his payback for what Miranda did to Ethan. Chris tells his men to keep tabs on Miranda for now while he continues investigating the cavern. It doesn't take long before he reaches a lab that belongs to this crazy cult leader, which allows our hero to learn more about Miranda's origins. Now, you guys already know where Miranda got her powers and that the whole village was her experimentation ground for the Black God, but we get further information about what she exactly did. It turns out that the village's 4 lords were supposed to be vessels for the planned revival of her daughter. However, each of them was incompatible to Eva's host. Then she used her powers to gain influence within the village until they started treating her like a god, which allowed her to freely experiment on its residents, all in the hopes of finding a suitable host for Eva. But this only resulted in the creation of the village's grotesque monsters. Along the way, Miranda came into contact with the Connections, who informed her of Rose's existence, who had the potential to be the perfect host for her long-dead daughter. On top of that, we also find out that Miranda used to be Oswell E. Spencer's mentor, way before he and his pals founded Umbrella. As a matter of fact, Miranda's connection to Oswell only ended when they had a difference in opinion on how to take advantage of their expertise in virology. See, Miranda wants nothing other than to bring her daughter back to life, but Oswell was far greedier. As we all know by now, he and the Umbrella wanted to basically trigger the next step of human evolution with their crazy viruses. On a side note, it's revealed that Umbrella's logo was inspired by the 4 lords of the village's insignia. After becoming aware of all this, Chris continues his investigation until he reaches a locked door in the lab. He shoots off its lock and discovers that Miranda has been holding the real Mia in this facility this whole time. Chris then tells Mia about what happened to Ethan and his plan to rescue Rose. However, Mia soon drops another big revelation on Chris, that Ethan isn't really dead yet because he possesses a special ability of his own that they've been keeping secret from everyone else. The story shifts its focus back to Ethan, where he awakens in a strange frozen land. Evelyn suddenly appears and starts telling Ethan about the origins of his strange powers. So, do you remember how each time Ethan's fingers or hands get cut off, someone just magically stitches them back together? Well, it turns out that's not just a game mechanic, because as Evelyn tells him, Ethan has already been dead since he got into a tussle with Mia and Jack back in Louisiana during the early parts of Resident Evil 7. The only reason he seems alive right now, not to mention why he has a regenerative healing factor, is because he was infected by the same mold derived from the black gold, the same thing that Evelyn herself was made of. Now, if you were wondering, the only difference between Evelyn and the fungus in the village is that Evelyn was a refined form of the mold, while the one in the village is the pure version. Anyway, the long and short of it is that Ethan Winters has been technically dead for a long time now, and is pretty much a monster himself. Evelyn tries to throw Ethan off his game during their conversation, mocking him and telling our hero that he'll never see Mia and Rose again. But he refuses to give up. The next thing he knows, Ethan has regained consciousness and finds himself inside the Duke's carriage. We learn that the Duke was actually the one who recovered Ethan's body earlier when Miranda killed him. And right now, he's driving his carriage to Miranda, knowing that Ethan wants nothing more than to give this insane mold lady a beating. The Duke warns Ethan that his physical body is already on the brink of destruction. But that doesn't stop our hero from doing everything he can to save his daughter. They soon arrive at Miranda's ritual site, and after saying some parting words to each other, Ethan tears through Miranda's underlings until he reaches her. He gets some good news when Miranda's ritual just ends up resurrecting Rose instead of her own long-dead daughter. And all the while, Miranda starts to weaken. Chris then arrives just in time to divert Miranda's attention, allowing Ethan to get to Rose. He and Miranda get into a literal custody battle for the kid. Unfortunately, Miranda wins the struggle and is able to swallow Rose into her body. This causes Miranda to mutate, and a climactic clash between her and Ethan ensues. Ethan gets the better of Miranda and finally kills her. Even better, Rose reemerges from Miranda's ashes in the aftermath of their duel, all safe and sound. However, just as the Duke had told him, the fight against Miranda had drained all of Ethan's remaining strength that not even his enhanced physiology can help him regenerate. Ethan can feel the end is near and passes out. Chris wakes up Ethan and helps him and Rosemary to get to a safe place so that he could finally detonate the explosives he attached to the mold in the cavern. But Miranda is one persistent hag, as is part of the Black God's natural features. It absorbs Miranda's consciousness, which allows her to take control of the fungal root and go for one last ditch attempt to attack our heroes. Our heroes continue to run toward the safe zone, with Chris informing Ethan that Mia's still alive. Ethan is of course happy to learn about this, but he's also well aware that he's not gonna make it. So Ethan makes his final moments count when he hands over Rose to Chris. And after telling Chris his dying wish, Ethan takes Chris's detonator and breaks away from them. Chris soon reaches their extraction vehicle and reunites with Mia. Not too far away, Ethan uses his last ounce of strength to detonate Chris's explosives, putting an end to the Black God, the village, and taking himself out in the process. Meanwhile, Mia realizes what her husband has just done. Chris comforts her, telling Mia that Ethan made the ultimate sacrifice for the good of everyone. Afterwards, K9 finally gives Chris his findings about the BSAA. It's revealed that they dropped their own bioweapons on the village to combat Miranda's army. In turn, Chris tells his squad to lock and load as they head over to the BSAA's HQ in Europe in order to deal with this whole new mess. Resident Evil Shadows of Rose, 2034. Now, Ethan's story might have come to a close by the end of Resident Evil Village's main storyline, but we do get a follow-up in the form of its Shadows of Rose DLC. This one is set approximately in the year 2034 and focuses on Rose. We learn that she ended up being raised as a ward of the United States government after the events at the village. She still gets to see her mom, Mia, and her sworn guardian, Chris, but it's more of a visitation rite than actually living with either of them. Rosemary grew up to be a social outcast due to her strange abilities, which has caused her to develop severe emotional and psychological issues. One day, a government agent who also happens to be one of Chris's old squad mates, K9, convinces Rose to go to a facility where she can participate in a test that will allow her to form a bond with a Black God sample that the government has acquired. According to K9, this will give her the opportunity to retrieve an artifact called a purifying crystal, something that has the power to get rid of her superhuman abilities. Of course, Rose, not wanting to be a social outcast anymore, jumps on this chance and soon finds herself in the so-called realm of consciousness, which is best explained as the mental manifestation of all the consciousness that the Black God has absorbed throughout its existence. And, well, let's just say that this world is just as much of a horror show as the village in the main story. First, Rose finds herself in an alternate version of Dimitrescu Castle, where she comes across an evil version of the Duke. On the bright side, our young heroine meets Michael, a mysterious spirit-like entity who serves as her personal guardian angel in this weird metal realm. Michael urges Rose to leave this dimension at first, but she's dead set on finding the purifying crystal to become a normal girl. Together, they manage to get out of the castle only for Rose to end up in a deeper part of the realm, which resembles the Beneviento residence. Here, our heroine is forced to confront her childhood traumas, which mainly stems from being bullied. And if that's not bad enough, this realm's mysterious ruler keeps on getting into Rose's head by mocking her and her late dad, Ethan. In turn, Michael helps out Rose by showing her a world that looks like the Winters household from when she was still a baby. Not only that, but Rose discovers a letter that Ethan wrote telling her how much he loves her. Anyway, Rose is inevitably thrown back to the Beneviento realm and soon discovers that its ruler is none other than Eveline, who's taken it upon herself to take out our young heroine because she's just too jealous that someone loves her. Michael takes Rose to safety once again, and she ends up in a new, deeper layer of the realm of consciousness next. This time the world resembles the village from the main story. Soon, Rose acquires the purifying crystal in this layer. She uses it, which causes her powers to be absorbed within it. But then a manifestation of Miranda's consciousness emerges in the realm and reveals the story's twist, that it wasn't really K9 who told her about this whole purifying crystal deal. It was Miranda. Specifically, Miranda created an illusion of K9 to trick Rosemary into coming to this realm. There's no moving on with this hag because Miranda's motive for doing this remains the same as it did 16 years ago, to try and use Rosemary as a vessel for Eva's resurrection. And with her powers encasted in the purifying crystal, there's nothing we can do to fight it. We then get another big reveal when Michael turns out to be none other than Ethan's own consciousness, which has become a part of the Black God's realm after the conclusion of the main story. Ethan manifests and protects Rosemary from Miranda after telling his daughter to make a run for it. However, Rosemary ultimately decides to embrace her powers and join the battle when she hears her dad suffering at Miranda's hands. So, she breaks the purifying crystal, which not only returns her powers but makes her level up. She proceeds to bring the psychic smackdown on Miranda and wins, erasing the crazy lady's consciousness from the realm entirely. In the aftermath, Ethan and Rose share a moment as he apologizes to her for not being around to raise her. Regardless, Ethan is happy and proud of the woman she's become. Now, accepting of her own superhuman abilities, Rose says a heartfelt goodbye to her dad as she returns to the real world, now with a renewed sense of purpose. Resident Evil Village ends a week after Rosemary's adventure in the realm of consciousness. She pays a visit to Ethan's grave and apologizes to her dad for missing his birthday, telling him that she had to undergo some tests. Then, an unnamed operative approaches Rose and jokes around by referring to her as Eveline. This rubs her the wrong way and she gets angry, going so far as to threaten the agent that she'll reveal the fact that she has superhuman abilities, something that not even Chris is aware of. They then get into a car and we pretty much learn that Rose is being treated like a living superweapon. Resident Evil Village's tale ends when another mysterious figure walks up to their car along the road. Resident Evil Requiem 2026. And finally, now I'm going to tell you all about the latest mainline RE game, Resident Evil Requiem, or Resident Evil 9. Resident Evil Requiem sees players controlling two protagonists throughout its story. First, there's Leon S. Kennedy, who has become even more badass since the last time we saw him, somehow. Then there's series newcomer Grace Ashcroft. Now, Grace was originally described as a rather clumsy girl working for the United States FBI when she was first introduced during Capcom's announcement for Resident Evil Requiem. However, there's way more to this new survival horror protagonist than meets the eye. For one, she's actually the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, one of the many playable characters in the RE spin-off game called Resident Evil Outbreak. Now, I'm not going to spoil things too much at this point, but all you should know is that Alyssa used to be an investigative journalist working for the Raccoon Press. More interestingly, Alyssa was at one point made aware of Umbrella's shady dealings with the Arklay Mountains, which then prompted the notorious mega corporation to pretty much mind-wipe her in the past. That aside, Resident Evil Requiem's tale begins in October of 2026. Almost 3 decades after the destruction of Raccoon City all the way back in 1998. At the start of the story, Grace is put on assignment to look for the truth behind a series of recent deaths. It would have been your typical open and shut case until we find out that the victims involved have all been survivors of the Raccoon City tragedy. More than that, the FBI suspects that these deaths were caused by an infection from Umbrella's T-virus, the same strain that wreaked havoc in the region almost 3 decades ago. This case eventually takes Grace to the Wrenwood Hotel, the same location where the latest casualty related to these mysterious deaths has been reported. But what's more interesting is that Grace has some history with the Wrenwood Hotel, and it's an exceedingly dark one. You see, this building was the same place where Grace's mother was killed some 8 years ago. In any case, Grace soon finds herself at the Wrenwood Hotel, and things just get worse from there when our heroine finds out that she's had a creepy stalker watching her for a few years now. It's also where we learn the exact details behind Alyssa's death. You see, the Wrenwood Hotel is actually located in a city bearing the same name, which happens to be one of Raccoon City's close neighbors. 8 years ago, Alyssa and Grace had been staying at the Wrenwood Hotel when they suddenly received a mysterious phone call. Well, things just went south from there, as we learned that an unnamed man wearing a hood had also been stalking Alyssa for the past couple of days. And it all came to a head when a blackout hit the Wrenwood Hotel and the hooded man started to hunt down Alyssa and Grace. From what our heroine remembers, Alyssa had told her to escape the hotel, which she ultimately did. But Grace was left traumatized after witnessing Alyssa's death at the hands of this mysterious hooded man. And as Grace recalls, the last thing her mom told her before her death was that Grace was her so-called hope. Moving back to the present, Grace remembers a bag that Alyssa had hidden during their fateful stay at Wrenwood all those years ago. Our heroine soon gets her hands on it along with its contents, Alyssa's personal journal and an old floppy disk. However, before Grace could get more information about her mom's demise, our heroine ends up getting ambushed by a recently zombified Wrenwood police officer. And although Grace is able to beat this undead monster, she gets bitten along the way. That's not even the worst thing to happen because Grace is soon knocked out and kidnapped by a mysterious pale dude. Our story then shifts to everyone's favorite badass uncle, Leon, who we learn has been working with Sherry Birkin, yes, that Sherry, on a mission from the DSO to investigate another one of the mysterious deaths plaguing Raccoon City survivors. We also find out that both Leon and Sherry have been suffering from the same mysterious illness that led to the other Raccoon City survivors' deaths. Canonically speaking, we can refer to this condition as Raccoon City Syndrome, a version of the T virus that has mutated within the body of its host, which allows it to adjust to its antibodies. What separates Raccoon City Syndrome from your typical T virus strain, however, is that it is known to have a 100% mortality rate, not to mention that there's no existing cure or vaccine for it. Anyway, Leon eventually starts to track down a man named Victor Gideon, the same guy who just kidnapped Grace. You see, Gideon has a long and dark history. The man used to work for Umbrella, and by the time the mega corporation folded and tons of its employees and operatives were put on trial, Gideon was one of the few figures within the company to have escaped justice. Sherry soon gets Leon up to speed about the recent events at the Wrenwood Hotel, which prompts our hero to make his way to the building. As if by chance or destiny, Leon is able to spot Gideon as the man hauls an unconscious Grace across Wrenwood streets. So Leon gives chase, but our hero ends up fending off fresh new zombies that Gideon has just created when he starts shooting random Wrenwood residents with a dart gun containing the T virus. Let's just say that Wrenwood would have instantly turned from a relatively drab city into a zombie wasteland if not for Leon and Sherry's efforts during this whole sequence. However, Wrenwood is saved from becoming another Raccoon City, but not before Gideon escapes with Grace. Without any other leads, Sherry works her magic and tells Leon to make his way to a place called Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, a medical facility that was once owned by Umbrella. Rhodes Hill eventually came into Gideon's possession after Umbrella folded in the early 2000s. Back to Grace, our heroine eventually reawakens at Rhodes Hill. Even better, she soon manages to free herself from Gideon's clutches and link up with Leon. There's no happy ending just yet, as it's here where the duo finds out that everyone at Rhodes Hill has been turned into undead T-virus monsters. To make matters even worse, Gideon traps Grace and Leon within Rhodes Hill and separates the two before barring any and all exit routes from the facility. In a nutshell, it's at this point where Resident Evil Requiem makes full use of its dual protagonists and gameplay mechanics. On one hand, Leon goes on an absolute tear through Rhodes Hill as he starts mowing zombies left and right. On the other hand, Grace traverses the facility by sneaking around and avoiding threats. This eventually leads Grace to meet and free Emily, a blind girl that Gideon has been holding captive this whole time. More revelations arrive when both Leon and Grace discover Gideon's true intentions. As it turns out, Gideon has been working with the Connections after he left Umbrella, and the man has always been obsessed with an old initiative known as the Elpis Project. In a nutshell, Elpis is this secret project between Umbrella and the United States government that's purportedly intended to use the T-virus as a catalyst that would allow a person to control the consciousness of others. Pretty much mind control. The mastermind behind this project happens to be none other than Oswell E. Spencer himself. Oh, and it also happens that Grace herself is the key to activating Elpis, although she doesn't know it yet. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Long story short, Grace and Leon do everything they can to escape Rhodes Hill along with Emily, in spite of Gideon's best efforts to prevent them from doing so. However, tragedy strikes when Emily gets a fatal wound, which then transforms her into a T-virus mutant. Leon is forced to take her out, which causes Grace to lash out and separate from him. Distraught by everything that's happened, Grace willingly chooses to join Gideon in order to find out the truth. It's here where she meets Zeno, Gideon's contact from the Connections. Zeno then tells Grace that she's the reason behind Raccoon City's destruction. On top of that, she might be the solution to prevent another tragedy like that from happening. Zeno and Gideon then lead her to the ruins of the fallen city. In the meantime, both Leon and Sherry's Raccoon City syndrome worsens. And if that's not bad enough, Zeno and the Connections successfully pull some strings in the US government to prevent the DSO from further investigating Gideon, Elpis, and the string of deaths caused by Raccoon City syndrome. Of course, they choose to ignore the DSO's orders and instead continue their quest. Leon makes his way to Raccoon City's ruins, which have since become a T-virus mutant wasteland. Leon and Sherry learn that the BSAA has also been snooping around Raccoon City this whole time. And it's also during this chapter in Resident Evil Requiem that the series sheds more light on Raccoon City's destruction. For one, Sherry and Leon learn that no one from the Pentagon actually ordered the missile strike on Raccoon City back in 1998, which begs the question, Who did? Meanwhile, Zeno takes Grace to the heart of Raccoon City. Leon soon gets into a confrontation with Gideon in an attempt to stop him from reuniting with Grace. Their duel occurs as a high-octane Mad Max-style motorcycle chase around the city and culminates with Gideon's apparent demise. Leon then heads over to the place where it all started for him, Raccoon City PD. Our hero soon finds out that the BSAA has been using this place as a base of operations. More importantly, Leon manages to spot Grace and Zeno on one of the cameras. Leon overhears Zeno tell Grace that the BSAA and other government offices have been snooping around Raccoon City this entire time with one sole purpose: to retrieve Elpis. And that's not the only big revelation to come out of Resident Evil Requiem. That's because Zeno would go on to explain that Raccoon City's destruction in 1998 wasn't just to prevent the T-virus from spreading. It was meant to keep Elpis from falling into the wrong hands. Zeno even goes as far as to say that Adam Benford's assassination during the events of Resident Evil 6 was spurred on by the fact that the late president caught wind of Elpis. But the revelations just don't stop coming, as it's also revealed that Emily, the girl Grace rescued before, is pretty much a clone of Grace. The connections actually created her to hopefully unlock Elpis, since they couldn't find Grace at the time. She's not the only one either. The connections have had a series of failed experiments like Emily in the past. However, what really gets Grace to unravel is when she connects the dots and realizes that even her mom's death, which was basically an assassination that Gideon carried out, was connected to Elpis. But the question still remains: what makes Grace so special that Gideon, Zeno, and the connections have made her a top priority in activating Elpis? Well, we don't get an immediate answer because Grace ends up passing out after these revelations. And although Leon attempts to retrieve her, Zeno orders one of his Tyrant units to stop our hero from doing so. And it's not just any Tyrant unit, it's Leon's old rival, Mr. X. So Leon and the Tyrant get into it and our hero emerges on top. Soon enough, Leon finds himself in the same place where Zeno has taken Grace, the facility where Elpis is being kept, ARC. As Zeno puts it, ARC needs a password to unlock Elpis. And, well, the only person that the connections believes knows the password is none other than Grace. The problem is, Grace has no idea what Zeno's even talking about. Their conversation is interrupted when Leon arrives on the scene and attempts to start some smoke with Zeno. On a side note, it's not explicitly stated as of this video, but there's a high chance that Zeno is actually a clone of Albert Wesker, given that not only do they share physical resemblances, but Zeno also seems to possess the same superhuman abilities that Wesker did. In any case, Zeno's almost able to take out Leon, but Grace intervenes. This allows Leon to find an opening and rescue Grace from Zeno's clutches. Not long after, Grace finds herself inside ARC's control room where she uses the floppy disk she found at the Wrenwood Hotel to discover the truth behind her origins. It turns out that Grace isn't Alyssa's biological daughter. She was actually a girl that Oswell E. Spencer adopted to make up for the atrocities he committed in the past. From there, Spencer eventually handed custody of Grace to Alyssa. Meanwhile, Leon's sickness finally catches up to him as he collapses on the ground before reaching Elpis. However, Grace finds him and motivates him to keep moving. They soon meet Zeno again, who tells Grace to enter the password to unlock Elpis. Grace agrees on one condition: that Zeno lets Leon live. Zeno agrees, and it's here where Resident Evil Requiem's branching paths kick in. You see, Resident Evil Requiem has two endings. And although Capcom themselves haven't confirmed which one is canon as of this video, I think that's pretty obvious considering what happens. Anyway, let's start off with the bad ending. In this route, Grace willingly enters the wrong password into ARC's console. This causes Elpis and the entire facility to be destroyed. In turn, Leon helps Grace reach a ledge that would help her get to safety, but our hero ends up getting taken out by Zeno. In this ending, Grace becomes the only survivor of the entire debacle within ARC. But then there's the other ending, which is the one everyone considers to be canon to the series. In this one, Grace figures out the real Elpis password after watching a video of Oswell E. Spencer talking to her mom. Also, remember, when Alyssa told her that she was her Hope right before Gideon took her out? Well, that's the thing. Hope is the password. Considering that Oswell E. Spencer regretted his actions in the end, Grace realizes that Elpis might not be a weapon at all. It might actually be something Spencer created to atone for his sins. So, testing her theory, Grace enters the real password into the ARC console. This releases Elpis, which allows Zeno to take it for himself. Zeno immediately gets cheeky and tries to screw over our heroes by injecting Elpis into himself, thinking that it would grant him the power he sought this entire time. However, Zeno gets a rude awakening when Grace shares the revelation that dawned on her after watching the footage from the floppy disk, that Spencer actually created Elpis as an antiviral agent capable of neutralizing the T-virus and other viral strains out there. So as a result, Zeno ends up losing his superhuman abilities. It's also here that we find out that Gideon survived his duel with Leon as he enters the control chamber and pretty much echoes everything that Grace just said. Zeno basically fires Gideon from the connections, but the mad scientist mutates and takes him out. See, Gideon has plans of his own to plunge the world into geopolitical chaos by removing the threat of biological warfare with the help of Elpis. On a side note, it's also in this ending that we get more of a hint that Zeno might very well be Wesker's clone when Gideon mentions that he was nothing but a quote-unquote imitation, though that's all we get as far as Zeno's origins go. Meanwhile, Grace manages to inject Leon with Elpis, which cures him of Raccoon City Syndrome. Gideon then sabotages Ark, which makes the whole facility start to crumble. Grace and Leon get separated for a bit, with our hero facing off against Gideon one last time in a classic Resident Evil final fight. As a side note, we find out that Gideon was actually infected with the newly modified NE gamma parasite, which pretty much means he's a version of Nemesis. Regardless, Leon wins in the end. He and Grace get reunited, and the duo are ultimately extracted from the scene by Chris's pals from the BSAA, aka the Hound Wolf Squad. In the aftermath, we find out that Leon and Grace were able to secure another dose of Elpis from Ark, which Leon means to administer to Sherry. On top of that, Leon hints that Emily might still be alive. Resident Evil Requiem's epilogue starts with a montage of news reports outing everything from Raccoon City Syndrome to Ark. Simply put, this entire thing threatens to expose the connections to the wider world and even perhaps implicate the President of the United States in playing a part in what happened in Raccoon City. On top of that, we find out that Leon was right. Emily did indeed survive the events at Rhodes Hill. Even better, we learn that Grace has adopted the poor kid and presumably administered Elpis to cure her of her own viral mutations. Resident Evil Requiem closes with a couple of mysterious operatives paying a visit to Ark's wreckage at the heart of Raccoon City. They radio in that they've neutralized all the remaining BSAA agents in the vicinity and have successfully retrieved their objective before the screen simply cuts to black. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the main Resident Evil timeline so far. Thanks so much for watching this video till the end, and I'll see you guys in the next one.